Ned Stark stood in the dim solitude of the Tower of the Hand, the meager light of dusk stretching shadows across the cold floor. Outside, the bustle of King's Landing pulsed beneath a reddening sky, the heat of the day drifting into a clammy evening haze. It had been days, weeks, truly, since he had begun to suspect the truth about Cersei Lannister's children. Their hair, the shape of their faces, the clues buried in a line of old records kept by Jon Arryn. Bastards, all of them, fathered by Jaime Lannister instead of King Robert. It was a festering secret, one that threatened to unravel the Seven Kingdoms and plunge them all into chaos if revealed. And yet, tonight, he had decided upon a different path than the one that had beckoned him so insistently just a day before. The righteous side of him had wanted to warn Cersei, to give her time to flee with her children. He had almost followed that instinct. Almost. But he was not built for these southern games of shadows and secrets, and a new clarity had seized him like the north wind on a winter morning. He would not tell her. He would not bend his honor to a woman who had contributed to the murder of Jon Arryn, nor to the endangerment of the realm. This single decision, small as it seemed, shifted the fate of houses and kingdoms alike. He watched the flame of a lone candle flicker on his desk, illuminating the lines of old genealogies that had once belonged to Jon Arryn. In the quiet, he heard the ghostly echo of Jon Arryn's dying words, "The seed is strong, but from now on he would hold that secret close. No more quiet warnings in the Godswood with Cersei Lannister. No chance for her to gather her power. No chance for her to thwart him before he could do what must be done." In that moment, Ned felt a strange mixture of relief and dread, as though he stood on a precipice, balancing between the lofty ideals of his youth and the grim necessities demanded by reality. He closed the ledgers, snuffed out the candle, and left the Tower of the Hand under the deepening sky to return to his chambers. He would gather his supporters, plan carefully, and wait for King Robert's return from the hunt. If all went well, Ned would present his findings to Robert directly and see justice done. Perhaps, he told himself, he could still keep the realm from tearing itself apart. Yet the roads we choose wind and twist in ways we cannot foresee. Ned was determined to protect Robert from enemies near at hand, to do his duty. But the days to come would test his resolve in ways he could scarcely imagine. When dawn arrived, it brought a thin haze that clung to the rooftops of King's Landing, a sultry air promising yet another scorching day. Ned rose early and broke his fast with bread, honey, and fruit. As he ate, he considered his allies. Ser Jorah Castle was his loyal captain of the guard, and he had his household men. He had an uneasy partnership with Peter Baelish Littlefinger, who claimed to support him out of allegiance to Catelyn. Varys, the master of whisperers, occasionally gave him small morsels of truth. The court was a nest of vipers, and Ned realized more clearly than ever that he might have to rely on men he didn't trust. But trust was scarce in the Red Keep. He chose to meet first with Littlefinger, summoning him in the late morning to the Tower of the Hand. Ned knew full well that Peter was cunning, with half a dozen hidden motives behind any vow of loyalty. But for the time being, Littlefinger's skill at manipulation and knowledge of the city might prove indispensable. When the sly, soft-footed man arrived, wearing a mocking half-smile beneath his trimmed mustache, Ned greeted him cordially if coldly. Littlefinger inclined his head with an exaggerated politeness. "My Lord Hand," Littlefinger said, letting his gaze roam about the room as if searching for cracks in the walls. "So dire that you summon me so quickly after sunrise? You wound me. I'd hoped you might invite me for a friendly cup of wine at midday, at least." Ned steeled himself. "We can share wine another time. I have a matter of importance I need you to help me with. But first, I need your word that you will not speak of this to the Queen nor her kin." Littlefinger placed a hand over his heart theatrically. "You doubt my sincerity, Lord Stark? I thought you knew. I serve only the realm. And Lady Catelyn, of course." Ned studied him. 1,000 times, he had wondered if it had been wise to trust Littlefinger so far. "There is a secret that must be kept from the Lannisters until the right time. We have reason to believe that we'll soon need the cooperation of the City Watch." They must stand with me when King Robert returns, for there will be a significant reordering of priorities. Peter's eyes glinted. Reordering of priorities, you say? That's a roundabout way of describing coup or arrest. But very well. If you want the gold cloaks, you'll need coin and perhaps a bit of persuasion. You'll get the coin from me, I presume, or from the crown's vaults, though the crown's vaults are rather empty at the moment. And you want them loyal to the hand rather than the queen or, heaven forbid, her brother, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Ned nodded, jaw tight. Yes. Can you make it happen? Littlefinger paused to examine a fingernail. Money will serve as the grease that makes the wheels turn. Janos Slint, the commander of the City Watch, has never been shy about accepting extra generosity. I can speak to him. And you realize, of course, that if the Lannisters make a better offer, he might pivot again. So you need more than money. You need fear or a promise of future reward. One without the other is dangerous. There was a hollow feeling in Ned's chest that told him he was stepping deeper into murky waters. He had hoped to avoid bribery, subterfuge, and all the vices that seemed second nature to men like Littlefinger. But duty demanded it. Do it. I'll have the gold. I'll see that the crown's debts to the City Watch are cleared. And if that's not enough, if Slint or his captains need a promise, I will provide for them once my position is secure. But they must not stand aside or look the other way when I come forward with charges against the Lannisters. A low whistle from Peter. Oh, you're serious about this, aren't you? He pressed a slim hand to his chin. Very well, my lord. The wheels will turn. Only, keep in mind that if you fail or if Robert arrives home less amenable to your charges than you hope, you will have given the Lannisters every excuse to name you a traitor. This is a gamble. A big one. Ned's throat felt tight as he said, We either bring truth into the light, or we kneel to false kings. I will not kneel to a lie. Littlefinger smiled almost sadly. As you wish, Lord Stark. You've my word that I'll do what I can. But a word of caution. The rest of the game is in motion already, and you might find that not warning Cersei Lannister was only one part of a puzzle. She might have secrets you haven't yet guessed. With that, Ned nodded, and Littlefinger left, his silken doublet whispering as he walked away. That night, Ned wrote letters, one to Stannis Baratheon, one to Renley. He did not send them yet, but he drafted their content carefully, explaining that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were born of incest, that Robert needed loyal men at his side, and that Ned would require both of their presences in King's Landing once Robert returned to confirm their rightful positions. He set the letters aside. He would send them the moment King Robert was in the city again and capable of comprehending the dangerous truth. A plan began to crystallize. Robert would come back from the hunt in triumph or battered from the boar, but alive. Ned would present proof, have the City Watch behind him, and with Renly and Stannis rallying at the capital, the Lannisters could be neutralized swiftly. King Robert would likely want Cersei's head for this betrayal, and Jaime's as well. Ned cared little for vengeance but a great deal for justice. He prayed to the old gods that the realm might weather the storm without too much bloodshed. The following day was thick with oppressive heat. Sansa came to speak with her father about her day with the Queen, but Ned politely waved her away, cautioning her not to share any secrets she might hear in the Red Keep. She looked at him with wide, innocent eyes, clearly not understanding, but she agreed nonetheless. Arya was out training, or perhaps exploring some nook of the castle. Ned felt a pang that he was not spending enough time with his daughters, that his focus was consumed by these lethal intrigues. But he reminded himself that, if he succeeded, he would keep them safe. He spent that afternoon gathering what further fragments of truth he could. Varys slipped in at midday, all muffled steps and careful whispers. The spider studied Ned with dark, inquisitive eyes. "My Lord Hand, you seem more troubled than usual. May I be of service?" Ned regarded Varys, unsure how many of his cards to reveal. But after a moment, he decided to risk a smaller confidence. "Robert remains in the field on this wretched hunt. I fear for him in ways I can't explain. If, for instance, the Queen had reason to remove him, she might. I must be sure he returns alive." Varys's eyes flickered. "Oh, I see. You believe the Queen is more dangerous than we realize. I wonder, then why you are not currently riding after Robert. He is in an isolated place, full of potential hazards. The boars are the least of his worries if the Queen's men are near. Ned clenched his jaw. He had thought of that. If he tried to go after Robert, the realm would be left in a precarious position, and the Lannisters might move quickly in the city. I cannot be everywhere at once, he said grimly. But if you have any means of ensuring that the king returns safely, I implore you to do so. Varys spread his hands in an imitation of powerlessness. Alas, I am but a whisper in the wind. My influence doesn't extend to the king's hunting party. The queen's cousin, Lancel Lannister, is likely pouring Robert's wine. If the rumors are correct, it would be so very easy for strong wine to dull the reflexes of a warrior, especially when faced with a boar. But that is only a rumor, my lord. I wouldn't dare claim it as truth. Ned's heart sank. Then we must prepare for the worst. If Robert should fall, we must keep his final wishes in mind. Varys nodded, adopting a look of sympathy. Pray that it does not come to that. War is a terrible thing, especially for the small folk. And I believe you are not a man who relishes shedding blood. Ned closed his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear the high-pitched ring of swords from the courtyard. No, I do not. Varys lingered a moment, as if on the cusp of saying something else, but then he dipped his head. I leave you to your burdens, Lord Stark, and he disappeared as silently as he came. The next day dawned with fresh rumors swirling through the city. There had been an accident on the hunt. Robert Baratheon had been gored by a boar and gravely wounded. He was being brought back to the Red Keep, battered and near death. Ned's heart seized. He had dreaded this possibility and prayed it would not come to pass, but it seemed the gods were deaf to his pleas. When Robert arrived, carried on a litter, his face was gray and set in a rictus of pain. He insisted on seeing Ned. There, in his bedchamber, with Grand Maester Pycelle and a few knights of the Kingsguard present, Robert held Ned's hand in a surprisingly strong grip. Gods, I was careless, the king rasped, half delirious with milk of the poppy. Too much wine, too much boasting. The boar. I gave him one good blow, by the gods, but it wasn't enough. He got me good. Ned swallowed hard. Your grace, rest, please. We can. Don't you coddle me, Stark, Robert snarled weakly. I'll speak my last words if I must. Get me the royal seal. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign. I want Joffrey to succeed me. He's my son after all. But you guide him, Ned. Make him a better king than I was. Robert coughed wetly, blood flecking his lip. I was no king, just a drunk who took the throne with a hammer. You'll do better. In that moment, Ned felt as if the world had narrowed to a single point of agonized decision. Robert was about to sign a will or proclamation leaving the realm to Joffrey. But Joffrey was not Robert's son. Telling Robert the truth now, in his delirium, might either kill him from shock or muddle his final words. Ned made a choice. Your Grace, he said. Let me prepare the documents. Rest for a moment. Everything will be as you wish. Robert's heavy lids fluttered. Yes, do it quickly. Summon me when it's time to sign. Ned bowed his head, turned to Grand Maester Pycelle and said, Make him comfortable. Then he hurried out, the sour taste of fear on his tongue. This was it, the final moment to act. If Robert signed a document proclaiming Joffrey his heir, the claim could be contested by Stannis or Renley, but it would plunge the realm into chaos. Perhaps even a war that would drag on for years. But if Robert, before his death, named someone else, Stannis, the rightful heir, then the line of succession would be clear. The realm might be spared, but how to do it with Cersei's watchers hovering about? With no time for carefully orchestrated revelations, Ned retreated to his chambers and penned a document. I, Robert of the House Baratheon, the first of my name, do hereby proclaim my brother Stannis as protector of the realm. On and on it went, establishing that until Stannis arrived, Eddard Stark would serve as regent to maintain order. He read it over, heart pounding. Could he truly slip this into Robert's hands? The king might sign it, never realizing precisely what the words said. Or perhaps Robert would become lucid for one critical moment and realize that Joffrey was not truly his son. Ned told himself that the realm's good outweighed all else. He rose, sealed the parchment with wax, and went to the king's bedside. Cersei was already there, a stone-faced visage of calm fury. She gazed at Ned with narrowed eyes. Joffrey hovered behind her, looking frightened. Pycelle was muttering about poppy and onions for the king's fever. Ser Barristan Selmy stood near the bed, stoic as ever, though his eyes flicked to Ned with concern. Robert stirred, blinking. "Ned, do you have it?" he rasped. Ned moved to the bedside. "I do, Your Grace." Carefully, he held out the document. Robert forced himself up on an elbow, wincing at the pain. "Read it," he commanded. Ned began to read, but before he could get more than a sentence in, Cersei stepped forward, pale lips pressed tight. "What's this about?" she demanded. "Why not name Joffrey in the writing, Robert? The boy is your heir." Ned ignored her for a moment, focusing on Robert. "Your Grace, we must look to secure the realm. This is what you wanted, your kingdom kept safe." He offered a quill. Robert gave Cersei a befuddled look. His eyes were already glazing with agony. It's all for the best," he managed. Then he scratched his name, a misshapen scrawl, at the bottom of Ned's parchment. The wax seal was affixed beneath, half crooked. Cersei drew in a sharp breath. "Let me see it." She snatched the parchment before Ned could object and skimmed its contents. He saw her face blanch, then flush red. Her voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "This is not what he said. He did not name Joffrey. You tricked him." Robert sank back, barely able to lift his eyelids. Yes, Joffrey. My son." He drifted away into a feverish slumber. "You will pay for this, Stark," Cersei said softly, handing the parchment to Joffrey. The boy read, confusion giving way to simmering outrage. Meanwhile, Ser Barristan stepped forward, concern etched on his features. "My queen, the king has spoken," he began. Ned's heart thundered. "This is the king's will. Until Lord Stannis arrives, I act as regent. You must respect it." Cersei's lip curled. "I respect nothing but truth. And the truth is that this is not the king's final intention. By the time the day is done, I will ensure the realm recognizes Joffrey as Robert's heir." Their eyes locked, and Ned knew the time had come for a more forceful approach. His quiet plan to reveal the secret to Robert had collapsed along with the king's health. The queen would not yield, but the city watch was presumably prepared if Littlefinger had done his part. Ned stepped back, turned to Ser Barristan. "Ser Barristan, see that no one removes the king from this chamber without my leave. We can hold a council session now." Barristan looked torn, but nodded, respectful of the king's hand. Joffrey bristled. "I am the prince. I command you. Let me see my father. Let me stay by his side." "The day is hot," Cersei said, her composure returning in a rush of cold calculation. "We will go to the throne room. Summon the council. Let us see whose words carry weight." Ned nodded, summoning as much calm as he could. "So be it." They left Robert in the care of Pycelle, who insisted he would do all he could. Ned prayed the man would not slip more poison into Robert's veins at the queen's behest, but there was no time to arrange for a more loyal maester. The clock was ticking, and Cersei's face was a mask of furious, regal dignity as she led her son and her retinue to the throne room. Ned was flanked by his household guards, who seemed on edge, hands near the hilts of their swords. When they reached the throne room, the sun was streaming through the high windows, painting the colossal metal seat of kings with harsh light. Peter Baelish was waiting, along with Varys, Renley Baratheon, and others from the small council. The hush that fell was oppressive, the faint rustle of clothing and armor echoing in the cavernous hall. Cersei strode to the base of the Iron Throne, her long green gown trailing behind her, and turned. Joffrey stood beside her, shoulders squared in a show of defiance, though he was still just a boy. Ned stepped forward. "Hear me," he said, voice strong. His Grace King Robert has signed a document naming me regent and protector of the realm, to serve until Lord Stannis Baratheon can take the throne. Lord Stannis is Robert's true heir. A ripple of murmurs traveled through the courtiers. Renley looked startled, though he quickly masked it. Varys's eyes glittered with unreadable intensity. Littlefinger raised his eyebrows, glancing between Ned and the Queen. Cersei placed a hand on Joffrey's shoulder. That is not the truth, nor is it what the king intended. He has always recognized Joffrey as his heir. My son inherits, and if you stand against him, Lord Stark, you stand as a traitor. Renley, stepping forward, cleared his throat. The realm is not blind, Cersei. If Robert left a sealed document with Eddard Stark, we should at least read its contents in full. Let us see the king's will. Ned held the parchment, but before he could speak, Janos Slynt and a contingent of gold cloaks marched into the throne room. They fanned out, forming two lines of armed men. Ned glimpsed Peter Baelish stepping discreetly forward, his posture subdued. For a heartbeat, Ned worried that Littlefinger had betrayed him, but the man wore no obvious smirk. Ned raised the parchment. I have the king's seal and signature. In this, King Robert refers to my rightful heir, not by name, but we all know who that is, Stannis Baratheon, his eldest brother. Cersei laughed softly, the sound echoing in the hall. You place your hope in a single scrap of parchment that does not even bear the name Stannis. Pathetic. The king was delirious. This will is worthless. Renly frowned. If my brother is true, Ly dying, we must gather. I say we name an interim regent, myself or Lord Stark, or the council as a whole, until Robert recovers or until we can ascertain his final intention. Joffrey's voice cracked. I am the king's heir, not you or Stannis. Guards, seize Lord Stark for forging that document. In that moment, Ned's men tensed, as did the gold cloaks. They looked uncertainly at Janos Slynt, who stood with a solemn expression. A hush seemed to cloak the entire throne room. Ned took a breath, preparing to call on the city watch to do their duty. But it was Ser Barristan Selmy who spoke first, stepping forward in his white cloak. I will not stand idly by while rightful authority is usurped. I have served kings my entire life. Let the small council read the king's last will, and let us do what is honorable. The king named Ned Stark protector of the realm, did he not? Then let him serve, so that we have peace until Robert either recovers or passes. Cersei's lips thinned. Joffrey opened his mouth, ready to shriek at Ser Barristan. But Barristan's heroic reputation was formidable. Even Joffrey hesitated. Ned seized the moment. City Watch, Janos Slynt, by the power vested in me as protector, I command you to restore order. The Queen may remain in the Red Keep under guard until the king's condition can be determined. No harm is to come to her, but if she resists, you will place her under confinement. His words hung in the air. Janos Slynt, sweating, glanced at Ned, then at Cersei, then at Peter Baelish, as though uncertain whose bribe was fatter. Baelish gave a subtle nod to Slynt. Suddenly, Slynt's face hardened. He raised a hand. Men, arrest the Queen and Prince Joffrey if they resist. By order of the hand. Collective gasp rose from the courtiers. Cersei's face was a portrait of astonished fury. The gold cloaks stirred, half raising their spears. Sansa and Arya were not present, thank the gods, so Ned had no immediate fear for their safety in this moment. But he knew this was the most perilous action he had ever taken. Cersei narrowed her eyes and turned to the gold cloaks. If you do this, you defy the rightful king. Joffrey is the king, not Stannis, not Eddard Stark. Her voice dripped with scorn and threat. But Slynt barked out an order, and half the gold cloaks advanced on the royal pair, weapons ready. Joffrey recoiled, fear in his eyes. You can't do this. I'll have your heads. The lot of you. Cersei gave Ned one final seething glare, then seemed to master herself. This is not over, she said. Every house in the realm will rise when they hear of your treason. You would dethrone my son because you cannot bear that a Lannister has the crown. Ned kept his voice level, though his heart pounded. The crown does not belong to House Lannister. Robert's child, his true child, would inherit if he had one. This is for the good of the realm." He motioned to the gold cloaks, and they took hold of Cersei's arms. She did not struggle, but a hateful malice burned in her emerald eyes. Others seized Joffrey, ignoring his wild flailing. Baelish watched with a semblance of mild surprise, though Ned detected a flicker of calculation in his gaze. Renley exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. "And what of my brother Stannis?" he asked quietly. "He will be here, I assume, once he receives word." Ned nodded wearily. "I will send a raven at once. Lord Stannis will come to take the throne. In the meantime, we keep the peace." "Peace?" Varys murmured, stepping out from a shadow. "Yes, if that is possible in times such as these." The small council session that followed was tense. Everyone present knew the storm that would break once Tywin Lannister heard that his daughter and grandchildren had been seized. The Lannisters had an army, gold, and cunning. They would not let Cersei languish in a cell without retaliation. But Ned, having acted swiftly, hoped to secure the capital. With Robert fading, the symbol of the Iron Throne might hold less weight. But if the city was in Ned's hands, then the Lannisters would have to attack from outside. Meanwhile, Ned could rally the other great houses to stand behind the rightful claim of Stannis. That night, Ned wrote the ravens. One to Dragonstone for Stannis, telling him to come at once and claim his throne. One to Winterfell for Robb, urging him to ready the North's bannermen for possible war. And another to Riverrun, informing Catelyn of all that had transpired. The letters were dispatched with riders and ravens. Already, the city was abuzz with talk of the Queen's arrest. Some called Ned Stark a traitor and a usurper. Others whispered that Joffrey was a bastard son of incest, a rumor that had begun to trickle through the gutters of Flea Bottom. But for now, the gold cloaks obeyed Ned, the council vacillated, and the Lannisters inside the city were scattered and stunned. Jaime Lannister was still away with a portion of the Kingsguard, rumored to be in the Riverlands near Harrenhal, though the details were murky. Tyrion Lannister was rumored to be traveling somewhere in the Vale. Tywin was across the Riverlands, leading a massive army. The tension in the air was so thick one could slice it with a sword. For 3 days, Robert lingered between life and death, sometimes babbling, sometimes thrashing in his bed. Grand Maester Pycelle applied leeches, potions, and prayers, but in the end, the king breathed his last on a morning tinted pink by dawn. Words swept through the red keep in hushed tones. Robert was gone, and with him the last vestige of official legitimacy for the Lannister children. Ned stood vigil over Robert's body, feeling an odd emptiness. They had been friends once in the war against the Targaryens. Robert had loved Lyanna, and Ned had followed him into battle, sure that they were forging a better future. Now, it felt like all of that had been undone by a single boar and a swirl of red wine. "Goodbye, old friend," Ned whispered. He wondered if Robert would forgive him in the afterlife for the way he had used his final hours to ensure Stannis' succession. He hoped so. Now the realm teetered on a blade's edge. Letters of condolence and calls for fealty would go out. Stannis had not yet arrived. Ned was protector, regent, but for how long and to what effect? If the lords of the realm chose to disregard Robert's will, or if Tywin Lannister advanced with an army, everything could collapse into warfare. In the days that followed, Ned's first move was to ensure the capital was secured. He placed men he trusted in key positions. Ser Barristan Selmy and his own loyal guard oversaw the Red Keep's defenses. Janos Slynt retained command of the Gold Cloaks, but under the watchful eye of Ser Jorah Castle. Ned had not allowed Cersei or Joffrey any moment of freedom. They remained under guard in a suite of rooms, with Myrcella and Tommen as well. Ned wrestled with the morality of imprisoning children. Tommen, especially, was a gentle boy who seemed too innocent to be involved in such a scandal. But Ned told himself that the realm's safety demanded it. For the moment, the children were well-fed, well-kept, and none would be harmed unless the Lannisters forced his hand. News came like shards of broken glass. Tywin Lannister was gathering an army at Harrenhal, or near it. He might march on King's Landing. Gregor Clegane was rumored to be pillaging the Riverlands. The lords of the Reach watched cautiously. The Tyrells would wait to see which way the wind blew. In the north, Ned's son Robb had called the banners and was gathering a host at Moat Cailin, preparing to march south if needed. The Vale was quiet. Lisa Arryn hunkered in her eyrie, refusing to commit. Meanwhile, still no word from Stannis. Each day, tension mounted in the capital. The small folk worried about a siege. The markets soared in price. Bread became more expensive. Beggars lined the streets. Ned tried to maintain order, refusing to see King's Landing starve. But the rumors kept swirling, each one worse than the last. That the Targaryens might come across the sea, that the Dothraki might invade, that the Lannisters would fling wildfire over the city walls, that Ned Stark was a tyrant who had locked the rightful king in a cell. Ned felt the weight of it pressing down on his shoulders as if it might crush him. On the 7th day after Robert's death, Renley Baratheon asked for a private audience with Ned. They met in the Solar, a small windowless room with a single lamp burning. Renley, dressed in green and gold, paced restlessly. "Lord Stark, the realm is in chaos," he said bluntly. "Stannis should be here, leading in Robert's stead, but he tarries. Why? I've sent ravens myself, urging him to come." No reply. Ned sighed, running a hand over his beard. "Stannis is as stubborn as he is just. He might be preparing ships, or he might be mulling over how to best claim the throne. Perhaps he fears a trap." Renly fixed him with a sharp look. "And what if Stannis does not come soon? I am Robert's younger brother. The lords know me, and I have some measure of popularity. Cersei and Joffrey remain your prisoners. We could shift the seat of power." Took Ned a moment to realize what Renly meant. "You want the throne for yourself?" Renly's face hardened, and for an instant, Ned saw a flash of ambition not unlike that of the Lannisters. "I don't want it, but the realm needs a king who can act, not hide on Dragonstone. If Stannis isn't coming, the 7 kingdoms might turn to me. My men are loyal, the Tyrells might back me. Mace Tyrell would rather see me on the throne than Stannis. But I have no desire to provoke another war if we can avoid it. I want your counsel and your support. We could keep the peace together." Ned's stomach twisted. He recalled how men like Littlefinger had argued for cunning, for manipulation. But his sense of honor told him that Stannis was Robert's rightful heir, no matter how cold or unlikable he might be. That was the law. That was justice. "I cannot betray the line of succession," he said evenly. "Stannis is the rightful king. I have sworn an oath to uphold Robert's last will." Renly exhaled in disappointment. "You're too rigid, Lord Stark. I admire your honor, truly, but in times like these, a bit of malleability can prevent kingdoms from collapsing. Stannis is not beloved. The Storm Lords fear his temperament. The Tyrells despise him. You might find yourself fighting a war to seat a king half the realm hates." "I understand the risk," Ned said, "but I will do my duty, come what may." Renly shook his head. "Then I can only hope Stannis arrives soon, or we'll see this city drowned in blood." He turned to go, then stopped. "If it comes to it, the men of the Stormlands might choose me over Stannis. Think on that, Lord Regent. The realm might be better served by unity behind a king who can gather the support of the South." With that, he departed, leaving Ned feeling even more isolated and uncertain. That night, in the gloom of the Tower of the Hand, Ned paced. He had read and reread the letters from Catelyn, from Robb, and from the Riverlands. War was brewing, unstoppable as a storm rolling across a black sea. The only question was which direction it would strike first. If Tywin Lannister decided to assault King's Landing, Ned's forces might hold if the City Watch remained loyal. If Robb marched south, they could engage the Lannisters in the field. Meanwhile, Ned had to watch for Renly's potential betrayal. The Tyrells might join him, and that would shift the balance of power drastically. Then there was Balon Greyjoy in the Iron Islands, always waiting for an opportunity to strike at a weakened mainland. The realm felt like a game board covered in scattered pieces, all about to collide. In the midst of his turmoil, a knock sounded at his door. One of Ned's guards announced, Lord Baelish wishes to speak with you, my lord. Ned stared at the door, weariness settling over him like a heavy cloak. Let him in. Littlefinger slipped inside, dressed in a muted brocade, his mockingbird pin glinting in the candlelight. He bowed gracefully. Lord Regent Stark, I come bearing tidings, though not necessarily good ones. Ned waved a hand. Speak. I'll hear them. Peter moved closer, voice low. Tywin Lannister has marched from Harrenhal with an army said to be at least 20,000 strong. Word is they're moving toward the Riverlands. They may attempt to break any force your son Robb brings south before it can reach you. Meanwhile, the Lords of the Reach, especially the Tyrells, are entertaining offers. Renley is wooing them to his cause. They might declare him king if Stannis fails to appear. The city stands on a tinderbox. Ned swallowed. I expected as much. Will the City Watch remain loyal if the Lannisters approach the gates? Baelish gave a small, ambiguous smile. For now, yes, my gold has helped keep Janos Slint's conscience fixed upon you. But if a siege grows long, if the Lannisters promise them higher pay or threaten their families, loyalties can shift. That's the nature of men, I fear. Ned closed his eyes. I will not bribe half the city. I'm not that sort of ruler. Littlefinger shrugged. Perhaps you should be, at least if you wish to remain in power. You still hold the queen and her children, after all. That's your greatest advantage. Sooner or later, Tywin will demand their release, or try to free them by force. Ned's thoughts turned dark. If he put Cersei on trial, exposed her incest, and condemned her, Tywin might respond by sacking half the Riverlands in vengeance. Joffrey was a child, but a dangerous symbol. The longer Ned held him, the more the realm would see it as an injustice if they believed he was a rightful king. Or the more the Lannisters would wage war if they believed him stolen. At length, Ned sighed. We'll see how Stannis responds. If he comes soon, and if the realm accepts him, then the Lannisters can be declared traitors for raising arms against the crown. I might negotiate a peace by exchanging the children for a cessation of hostilities. But if Stannis doesn't come, he trailed off, not wanting to speak the next words. Littlefinger gave him that thin-lipped smile again. Indeed, if Stannis does not come, the realm may decide on another king. Perhaps Renley, perhaps even a Targaryen if rumors of survivors are true. We are in uncertain times, my lord. With that, Baelish gave a shallow bow and took his leave. Ned stood there a long time, the candle burning low, as the oppressive knowledge of how quickly everything might unravel weighed on him. When the morrow dawned, Ned went to speak with Cersei, hoping for some diplomatic understanding, though he doubted it. He found her in her guarded suite, pacing like a caged lioness. Joffrey was sullen in a corner, Myrcella's eyes red from crying, and Tommen looking frightened. 2 gold cloaks stood at the door, arms crossed. When Ned entered, the queen's gaze latched onto him. Come to gloat, Lord Stark? To see how the mighty have fallen. Ned kept his voice calm. I come to see if there's a path to peace. War brews outside these walls, and Tywin Lannister will not sit idle. Cersei's laugh was bitter. Oh, I'm sure he won't. You have me and my children as prisoners, and you talk of peace. You destroyed what little peace there was the moment you seized the crown for Stannis. Ned clenched his jaw. You know Joffrey has no claim. His father was Jaime, your brother. By law, Stannis is next in line. I must uphold the king's will. She bared her teeth in a mockery of a grin. You speak of law and justice, but all I see is a northern fool who misunderstood the game. You think Tywin will yield? You think the realm will accept Stannis, a man with no warmth and no ties to the other houses? War is upon us, and I don't see you winning it easily. Her gaze flicked to her children, then back to Ned. But you have all the leverage you need. Kill us if you must. End our line. Then see how the realm reacts to your butchery. Ned refused to rise to the bait. No one will harm your children if it can be avoided. But I cannot in good conscience release you while your father raises an army. She sneered, crossing her arms. Then you've backed us all into a corner. Congratulations. He was about to reply when Joffrey stood, face twisted with anger. I am the king, and you will regret your treason, Stark. When my grandfather arrives, we'll see you dragged through the streets in chains." Ned's temper flared, but he held it in check. He turned on his heel and left without another word. Over the next week, ravens brought dire news from every corner of the realm. Tywin Lannister's forces clashed with small pockets of Riverlords loyal to Riverrun, ravaging villages. Robb Stark had crossed the Neck, forging south with an army that, rumor said, was at least 20,000 strong. The Vale remained aloof. The Tyrells were on the brink of siding with Renly if he declared himself king, and there was still no sign of Stannis. Each day, the people of King's Landing grew more fearful, stocking up on provisions or preparing to flee. Ned dreaded a siege. At last, a raven arrived from Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon wrote in his terse style that he was raising a fleet and would soon sail for King's Landing to claim his birthright. Ned felt a rush of relief tempered by apprehension. If Stannis arrived with ships and men, he could hold the capital. The question was whether the realm would accept him, or if they would gather behind Renly. The Baratheon brothers were poised for conflict, and Ned could not be sure if Stannis would attempt to make peace with Renly or if they would tear each other apart. Letters flew back and forth. Ned pleaded with both Baratheon brothers for unity, for a show of strength together against the Lannisters. But while Renly's replies were conciliatory, they always hinted that Stannis should yield in favor of his younger brother. Meanwhile, Stannis's letters insisted that he and only he was the lawful king, and Renly must bend the knee or be branded a rebel. The future looked grim. Word came that Robb Stark had reached the twins and brokered a passage across the Green Fork of the Trident. Stories abounded of a cunning arrangement with Lord Walder Frey. None knew the details, but it meant the northern host was on the move. With their father's letters urging caution, they might well come to King's Landing, or pivot to confront Tywin in the Riverlands. Tywin, for his part, was ravaging Tully lands, daring Riverrun or the north to face him. Jaime Lannister was rumored to be at Tywin's side now, eager to crush anyone who stood in their path. They had not marched directly on King's Landing yet, perhaps uncertain of the city's defenses, or perhaps waiting for a better moment. The tension was suffocating. In the corridors of the Red Keep, Ned found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, half expecting an assassin's blade. Littlefinger still flitted about, offering wry commentary. Varys was elusive, disclaiming any real power. Ser Barristan stayed loyal, as did the bulk of the Kingsguard, though some grumbled about having no true king to guard. Cersei and Joffrey remained locked away, cursing Ned's name. Then, one evening, at the cusp of dusk, horns sounded from the walls of King's Landing. Ned, startled, hurried out to a courtyard to see the city gates opening. A column of mounted knights was entering, clad in mail and plate with a proud stag banner. Renly Baratheon rode at the head, accompanied by Loras Tyrell, the famed Knight of Flowers. Behind them trailed hundreds of cavalry, all impeccably equipped. The small folk peered from windows and doorways, uncertain whether to chay or quake. Renly had come with a partial host, presumably aiming to stake his claim or at least set terms. Ned met them in the courtyard, a mass of gold cloaks behind him. He wore plate himself, the direwolf of House Stark on his surcoat. Ser Barristan stood at his side. Renly dismounted, eyes scanning the yard. He spotted Ned, stepped forward, and extended a hand. "Lord Stark, you see I have come peacefully. I've left a larger host on the Rose Road, camped. I bring only a small retinue into the city." Ned inclined his head. "Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Renly. Or should I call you King Renly?" Renly's smile was tight. "Let us not stand on ceremony. My men name me king, that's true, and the Tyrells are prepared to back me. But I've come to negotiate. Perhaps we can find a solution that avoids shedding Baratheon blood on the battlefield." Ned gestured for them to follow. "Very well. We'll speak in the council chambers." They led Renly and his closest advisors inside, while Loras Tyrell and the rest of the knights remained in the courtyard. Before entering, Ned quietly instructed Janos Slynt to keep an eye on their every move. Tension flared in the corridors as the new arrivals passed the gold cloaks and the occasional glare from a Targaryen loyalist or a commoner. In the council chambers, Renly took a seat at the table's head, a bold move as if claiming the position of king by right. Ned sat opposite him while Peter, Varys, Ser Barristan, and others observed. Renly folded his hands. We all know the realm is on the brink. Tywin Lannister is ravaging the Riverlands, your son Robb marches south, and my brother Stannis has yet to arrive. The Tyrells have joined me, the Stormlands will follow. Lord Stark, your sense of honor is admirable, but you must see reason. The realm will not flock to Stannis. He is too stern, too cold. I can unite the South. With your support, the North can remain largely autonomous under the crown, with all the privileges you desire. You would be my hand or regent if you prefer. We can see the Lannisters punished and restore order. Ned's heart sank. He had expected this. Stannis is Robert's heir, he said quietly. He is the rightful king of Westeros. My conscience and honor demand I support him. Renly's jaw tightened. And do you think Stannis will show gratitude for your loyalty? He is not the sort to soften. He will view every lord who did not immediately side with him as a traitor. He'll purge the court, perhaps even demand I pay for daring to claim the crown. That's a path to another rebellion, another war. I'm offering you a chance to avoid it. Accept me as king, and in return, I'll see the Lannisters brought to justice, and your house exalted. Ned met Renly's gaze. Around the table, the others watched intently. Littlefinger seemed to be listening with marked interest, Varys with an opaque expression, Ser Barristan with a stern frown. I gave my word to Robert, Ned said, to uphold his final will. That points to Stannis. I cannot break faith. Renly exhaled, leaning back in his chair. If you maintain that position, you force me to act. I have the Tyrells at my back, and soon the Stormlords. Perhaps half the realm might join us, while the North stands behind you and Stannis. The Iron Throne is not large enough for two kings. Ned felt the weight of the realm on his shoulders. Is there no way to broker peace until Stannis arrives? Let him speak for himself. If the lords then decide. Renly shook his head. Men don't choose kings after the fact. They choose them in the moment. Time is not your friend here, Lord Stark. A beat of silence. Then Ser Barristan cleared his throat. If I may, my lord, the people love peace. War has already claimed too many lives. Perhaps we should wait for Lord Stannis to arrive. Let the two Baratheon brothers meet. Come to some accord. Renly gave a short laugh. An accord with Stannis? If you knew him as I do, Ser Barristan, you'd know that's not likely. Stannis will never bend. And I'll not place my head willingly under his sword. The meeting ended in stalemate, with Renly withdrawing to his temporary quarters in the Red Keep, surrounded by a guard of Tyrell knights. Ned stared after him, dread gnawing at his gut. All signs pointed toward a fracturing realm. The only question was which blow would land first and where. A few days later, ravens arrived in swift succession. Stannis was on the move, his ships seen off Storm's End. Robb Stark had met a Lannister force near Riverrun and defeated them soundly, capturing Jaime Lannister in the process. The news rocked King's Landing, stirring hope and alarm in equal measure. Jaime Lannister was a prisoner, Tywin's main field commander taken. Meanwhile, Tywin was rumored to be retreating south, uncertain how best to respond. The balance of power began to shift. Renly took this as a sign. He confronted Ned again, this time more forcefully. Ned, your son has captured Jaime. If you ally with me, we can corner Tywin, force him to yield, and then deal with Stannis from a position of strength. But Ned still refused to abandon his oath to seat the rightful heir. My son took Jaime in the name of the king, not in your name, Renly. Stannis is coming. Let us see how events unfold. Renly's frustration bubbled over. You would risk open war between me and Stannis because of a technicality? The realm needs a king now, Ned. Not tomorrow. Not after another 1,000 men die. If you force my hand, I'll take the throne by right of conquest. Ned's eyes narrowed. And if you do, You will be no better than the Lannisters who tried to seize power through deceit." Their conversation ended on that bitter note. In the days that followed, tensions in the Red Keep soared. Renly's knights guarded him zealously, while the gold cloaks eyed them warily. No open violence broke out, but the city felt like it sat on the edge of a knife. Meanwhile, Ned visited the dungeons where Cersei and Joffrey were kept under comfortable house arrest. She wore her disdain like armor, flicking her gaze dismissively at Ned whenever he appeared. Joffrey seethed. Myrcella and Tommen sat quietly, terrified. Ned found himself pitying those children for the storm they had been born into. Weeks slipped by with no direct confrontation, though war raged beyond the city. Robb consolidated his hold on the Riverlands, forging an alliance with the Tullys. He demanded that Tywin Lannister withdraw or see Jaime executed. Tywin refused, but withdrew all the same, regrouping near Harrenhal. Renly's host grew outside the city, with the arrival of more Tyrell bannermen. And then, at last, Stannis Baratheon's fleet appeared in Blackwater Bay, black sails dotted with the golden flaming heart of the Lord of Light, a sigil he had adopted at the urging of the Red Priestess Melisandre. Rumors circulated that Stannis had taken up a foreign religion, that he burned the statues of the Seven at Dragonstone. But now he was here. Ned stood on the walls as the ships docked. Soldiers in dark livery poured onto the docks, disciplined and solemn. At their head was Stannis himself, lean and grim, a man carved from granite. With him, a woman in red who garnered fearful whispers. Stannis had come to claim his crown, by fire and blood if need be. The next day, Ned met Stannis in the throne room. Renly was there, arms crossed, glaring at his brother. The small council stood on edge. Stannis gazed at Ned Stark with cold respect. "Lord Stark, you have done your duty. My brothers will name you protector until my arrival. I have arrived." Ned inclined his head. 1,000 tensions coiled in his chest. "Your Grace," he said, giving the man the title of king. "The city is yours, if the lords will accept you. Cersei and her children remain in custody. Tywin Lannister stands in open rebellion." Stannis turned his stern gaze on Renly, who stood near the Iron Throne with a stiff posture. "I see my younger brother imagines himself a king, yet he stands in my city at my seat and does not kneel." Renly bristled. "You do not own me, Stannis. The lords have rallied to me. Your claim is by law, but a king cannot rule without love. The realm needs a king they will follow willingly, not fear." Stannis's lips tightened to a thin line. "They will follow the rightful king, or they will face my wrath. That is law." He turned back to Ned. "Lord Stark, do you serve me, or do you serve my brother?" Ned's voice rang clear. "I serve the rightful heir of Robert Baratheon. That is you, Stannis. I have done my best to hold the realm together in your absence." Stannis gave a curt nod. "Then let us see if we can avoid further bloodshed. Renly, kneel before me and acknowledge me as king, and I will show you mercy. You may keep Storm's End, be my heir until I have one of my own blood, but I will not suffer a pretender." Renly's face was dark with defiance, but Loras Tyrell laid a hand on his shoulder. They exchanged a look. Dozens of Tyrell and Baratheon knights stood behind Renly, and across the throne room stood Stannis's men, flanking him. The gold cloaks watched from the periphery, uncertain. Tension rose like steam in the hot air. Renly's voice was tight as a drawn bowstring. "Stannis, you have no love from the south. Your new god will scare them. Your lack of warmth will alienate them. Even if I kneel, half my bannermen would revolt. A civil war is coming, unless you abdicate in my favor." Stannis's expression hardened, and his hand fell to the hilt of his sword. "I will never abdicate. Kneel." Renly's jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, Ned thought the younger Baratheon might attempt violence. But at last Renly breathed out, "Stubborn fool. So be it. We'll see who the realm chooses." He turned on his heel and strode out, followed by his knights. Loras Tyrell gave a final, regretful look around before trailing after him. In that single moment, the possibility of a peaceful resolution shattered. Stannis mounted the Iron Throne with stiff, regal composure. Ned watched, knowing that half the realm might soon consider Stannis an unwelcome tyrant, while the other half saw him as the only lawful choice. War in the south, war in the Riverlands, war at the gates. All because a single secret had festered too long: the parentage of Cersei's children. Yet, for now, Ned had installed the rightful king upon the Iron Throne, or so he believed. No one in the throne room cheered. Even the High Lords present looked uncertain. Varys inclined his head in a slight bow. Peter Baelish gave a perfunctory nod. Ser Barristan knelt, his white cloak pooling on the floor. The gold cloaks hesitated, then dropped to a knee. Ned remained standing, but bowed his head. "Your Grace, the city is yours," he said softly. Stannis placed both hands on the arms of the throne. "Then let us bring justice. Bring me Cersei Lannister." Within the hour, the Queen was brought forth under guard, Joffrey struggling beside her, Myrcella and Tommen behind. They stared up at the dark figure of Stannis Baratheon seated on the spiked metal seat. Ned stood to one side, heartsick at the sight of children in chains, but seeing no easy path. The Queen's green eyes blazed with hatred. Stannis's voice cut the silence like a razor. "Cersei of House Lannister, you stand accused of high treason. You bedded your brother, bore his children, and passed them off as the king's trueborn heirs. Do you deny it?" She stared back defiantly. "I deny nothing. The truth is meaningless. Robert was a pig, drunk and worthless. My children were the best of me and Jaime. Not that you can comprehend such things." Stannis's face remained impassive. "They are abominations born of incest, a stain on the realm. You have conspired to commit treason and murder. For these crimes you shall be executed." He turned cold eyes on Joffrey. "And you, boy, you are no trueborn prince. Your claim to the throne is void. Do you have anything to say?" Joffrey clenched his fists, tears brimming. "You can't do this. I am the king. I'll kill you, you bastard." Stannis's lip curled. "The arrogance of a false prince. You're lucky I do not hang you from the city walls. But perhaps you are just a child. I will show the realm that I can be merciful." He waved a hand to the guards. "Take him, his sister, and his brother to the black cells. They will remain there until I decree otherwise." Cersei let out a raw scream of fury, lunging for Stannis, but the guards held her back. "Monster," she spat. "You'll burn for this." The children sobbed as gold cloaks dragged them away. Ned looked on, sorrow carving deep lines into his face. He had wanted justice, but he realized that justice under Stannis would be as cold and unyielding as winter itself. War was not yet avoided. Tywin Lannister would never submit while his daughter and grandchildren were in chains. Renley now threatened from the south. And what of the north and Robb, who had gone to war primarily for Ned's sake? The realm was still balanced on the edge of chaos. Stannis turned to Ned. "You have done me a service by revealing their treason. Remain hand of the king, and help me bring order." Ned gave a grim bow, though his mind churned with unease. "As you command, your grace." Outside, the city stirred with fresh rumors. Some cheered the downfall of the Lannisters, for they despised the queen's arrogance. Others called Stannis a usurper, a cold tyrant enthroned by northern trickery. Whispers of Renly's rival court circulated. Talk of a golden alliance with Highgarden that might soon march on the capital. Meanwhile, Robb Stark was rumored to be forging alliances of his own in the Riverlands, possibly eyeing independence for the north if the southern kingdoms kept tearing each other apart. The War of the Five Kings, they would call it, though only a few realized that name in those early days. In the weeks that followed, Stannis dispatched ravens demanding fealty. Some lords bent the knee. Others declared for Renly. Tywin Lannister's massive army refused to yield. Word spread that the great Tywin was marching east toward King's Landing, determined to free his daughter and grandchildren. Stannis prepared for war, mustering every resource he could. Craftsmen forged new weapons, and rumors circulated that Stannis's Red Priestess had some darker power. The gold cloaks braced for a siege, Ser Barristan drilling them in the yards. Ned oversaw fortifications, praying daily that a last-minute peace might be found, but knowing in his heart that the land would drown in blood before it was over. Through it all, Ned Stark reflected on that single choice, never warning Cersei that he knew her secret. Had it changed everything? Likely. Would the realm have been better off if he had followed his first instinct and given her a chance to flee? Perhaps fewer men would die, or perhaps Joffrey would have taken the throne uncontested, plunging the realm into a tyranny. There was no simple answer. The Game of Thrones was no place for simple answers. Yet Ned carried on. He tried to be the conscience of Stannis' court, persuading the king to spare innocence, to limit the cruelty of war. He wrote frequently to Robb, urging caution. He wrestled with the knowledge that Sansa and Arya, still in King's Landing, had seen more horror than any child should. Sansa was subdued, half in shock at the arrest of her one-time betrothed, Joffrey, while Arya bristled with a quiet anger at the injustices she witnessed. Meanwhile, news from the east spoke of Daenerys Targaryen stirring among the Dothraki, but that was a tale for another time. Winter loomed on the horizon, metaphorically and literally, as the seasons shifted. Armies moved like thunderclouds across Westeros. Cersei languished in a cell, consumed by bitterness. Jaime a captive in the north, Tyrion out of reach, Tywin unstoppable. Renly forging an alliance to claim the crown. Stannis perched on the Iron Throne, glowering at a realm that refused to bow. And Ned Stark stood in the center, having preserved his honor but at a cost yet unknown. When the first horns of war sounded outside the gates of King's Landing, Ned felt the weight of his sword more heavily than ever. The day had come. Tywin's banners, joined by remnants of Lannister loyalists and some turncoat lords, advanced along the Blackwater Rush. Renly's host of Tyrell knights threatened to converge from another direction, and Stannis prepared his fleet to block them. Within the city, panic blossomed anew. The War of the Five Kings began in earnest, and everyone asked, would the realm ever know peace again? Standing on the battlements, the crisp wind off the river tangling his hair, Ned recalled the rookeries and the smell of pine from Winterfell. He thought of how each choice we make can cast ripples that become waves. He had known Cersei's secret, and he had chosen silence rather than a warning. This was the realm that choice had shaped. With a heavy heart, Ned whispered a prayer to the old gods that, somehow, through all the blood and ruin, a better future might be born. But he knew better than to rely on prayers in a city like King's Landing. War was here, the die was cast, and the Game of Thrones would spare no one. So he closed his eyes, inhaled a long breath, and prepared to face what came next, honor-bound, to the bitter end. Ned Stark stood on the battlements of the Red Keep and let the noise of King's Landing wash over him like a distant tide. The city bristled with tension, an entire population holding its breath. Tywin Lannister's banners approached from the west, while Renly Baratheon's growing host threatened from the south. Within the walls, King Stannis Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, grim-faced, implacable, and ready to unleash the fury of the realm on any who defied his claim. Yet half the realm still questioned that claim. They whispered that Robert's younger brother Renly had the more charismatic cause, or that the boy Joffrey was the rightful ruler, or that the North might carve its own kingdom under young Robb Stark. None of this would have unspooled the same way, Ned knew, if he had traveled a different road months ago, if he had confronted Cersei face to face in the Godswood and warned her that he knew the truth of her children. But that moment, once upon a time, had come and gone. Instead, he had chosen silence. He had read the genealogies in Jon Arryn's ledgers, realized that Joffrey was born of Lannister incest, and kept that truth secret until it could be revealed to Robert directly, or so he had intended. Robert's untimely death had forced Ned's hand. Now the city choked on rumors, arrests, and the imminent threat of war. He inhaled the cool morning air and surveyed the horizon. The walls gave him a vantage of the Blackwater Rush, a wide band of steel gray that curved outside the city. Beyond it, fields unharvested, villages half abandoned as small folk fled. The sun cast gold across the water, but Ned's heart felt weighted. War would come soon, perhaps this very day, because Tywin Lannister would not let his daughter and grandchildren remain imprisoned in King's Landing forever. He turned and made his way down the stone steps, his guards, northern men, plus a few loyal gold cloaks, falling in behind him. The yard hummed with purposeful activity. Blacksmiths hammered steel into swords and spearheads. Newly drilled gold cloaks formed up in ragged lines, trying to impress the white-haired Ser Barristan Selmy. Barked orders echoed off the walls. Soldiers checked straps, chainmail, arrow fletchings. The Red Keep had never been so crowded with armed men. Through the bustle, Ned moved to the stables, where two men waited for him. Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, and Lord Alistair Florent, a bannerman of Stannis from the Reach. Both had arrived with Stannis's fleet and troops. Davos offered Ned a respectful bow. "Lord Hand," the Onion Knight said, "King Stannis asked me to stand by you if there's need for counsel." Florent sniffed the air, glancing about with mild distaste. "This city is on edge. If Lord Tywin attacks from one side and Lord Renley from another, we'll be pinned." Ned tried to keep his voice neutral. "Then we must hope the walls hold, or that the day does not come when both armies decide to attack at once." Davos frowned, lines deepening around his eyes. "Your Grace, that is, King Stannis, believes we should sally out and strike first at Tywin before he's ready. It would show strength and preserve the farmland. A siege of King's Landing starves everyone inside. And if we sally, we risk leaving the city's defenses weakened," Ned said. "If Renly seizes the moment, he could take the city in our absence. Or so Stannis must fear." Florent gave a stiff nod. "Precisely the dilemma. Stannis is determined, but we are outnumbered if we fight two fronts at once." Ned rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the stubble that seemed to grow quicker with worry. "We shall do what we can with the men we have. I'll speak with the king shortly." It was not long before Ned found Stannis in the council chambers, a cavernous hall with a long, polished table at its center and high windows allowing spears of morning light. Stannis, dressed in black with the flaming heart of his new sigil embroidered on his breast, leaned over a spread of maps. The Red Priestess, Melisandre, stood at his shoulder in a scarlet gown, her fiery hair cascading over her shoulders. She seemed to watch the map as if she could read the future in its ink. Ser Axel Florent and others clustered around, eyes on their king. Ned stepped forward. "Your Grace, have there been any new tidings?" Stannis nodded curtly, gesturing to a message near the map. "A raven arrived this morning. My scouts say Tywin has moved out from Harrenhal and is within striking distance of the Blackwater. Meanwhile, Renly's forces have swelled with more Tyrell bannermen. He camps near Bitterbridge, still deciding whether to march on the capital. He sent me a letter demanding I yield the throne or face his armies." Ned's lips tightened. "He won't yield to you, then?" A ghost of a smirk appeared on Stannis's face, more like a brief twitch of his mouth. "Renly would never yield. He's convinced he'd be beloved, while I'd be feared, that his cause would unify the realm, while mine would tear it asunder. But I am the lawful king, whatever he or the Tyrells believe." Ned inclined his head. "Have you considered offering him terms? A joint rule or some compromise? I know you dislike such talk, but it might spare many thousands of lives." Melisandre's voice slipped in, low and resonant. "There is only one true king. The Lord of Light will not abide a false usurper, whether he calls himself Joffrey or Renly or any other name." Stannis's gaze flicked to Ned. "I have offered him mercy," he refused. "I'll not beg him to accept my kingship. I will gather every man in the city if I must, but the throne is mine by right, and I mean to keep it." Ned thought of all the men sharpening swords, all the men forging spears, all the men feeding wives and children within the city walls. If a siege came, the small folk would pay first and hardest. But the time for calm negotiation seemed to have passed. Robert's death, the arrests of Cersei and her children, the declaration that Stannis was the rightful king. All of it had poured fuel onto a blaze. He spread a second parchment on the table. "Your Grace, I've received my own raven. My son Robb has bested Ser Jaime Lannister in battle. Jaime is in captivity at Riverrun, and Tywin's vassals have retreated toward the southwest. The Riverlords are rallying behind my son. He wants to know whether to continue pressing the offensive or to march south to King's Landing. Stannis's eyes glimmered with cold interest. If the boy is truly unstoppable, I could use his swords. But perhaps your son intends to proclaim himself king in the north? A rumor I've heard whispered. Ned felt a spike of alarm. I can't speak for what my bannermen might push him to do. The north has often felt distant from the south. But I believe in my son's loyalty. He fights to defend House Stark and to see justice done for the crimes against my family. I'll send word that King Stannis requests his aid. Melisandre watched Ned intently. Be certain, if the boy chooses to break away, it will only fracture the realm further. Stannis gave a short nod. Write to him. Let him know I'd welcome the North's allegiance, and perhaps reward him with wardenship over the entire North if he bends the knee. Stress the threat of Tywin Lannister. That might unify us against a common enemy. Ned dipped his head, though he felt uneasy. Robb was only 16. He had proven himself in battle, capturing Jaime Lannister. But was he ready to stand toe-to-toe with a king so unyielding as Stannis? And what of the Riverlords, who might be just as wary of a king they barely knew? Especially one rumored to have burned the statues of the Seven at Dragonstone. Treading on quicksand seemed easier than forging alliances in this climate. He left the council chambers soon after, mind churning with the endless complexities. Outside, in the corridors of the Red Keep, he nearly bumped into Peter Baelish. Littlefinger offered a mocking half-bow. Ah, Lord Stark, busy times. I see you've allied yourself with our stone-faced king. Ned eyed him warily. I serve the rightful king, yes. Do you have something to add? Littlefinger smirked. Merely that the Tyrells are richer in gold and harvests than we might guess. If the city falls under siege, that wealth will buy many friends for Renley. All the while, the good King Stannis can rage about right and wrong, but the reality is that men follow coin or fear. Ned felt his patience slip. I'm not eager for your counsel, Lord Baelish, especially if it involves betrayal or bribes. The City Watch remains loyal for now. Let's keep it that way. Of course, my lord. One can hardly question your approach, seeing how smoothly everything's gone so far. Baelish's mouth twisted into a wry grin. I'll just remain in my counting house, shall I? Let me know when you need me to buy off a few more thousand swords. Ned watched him vanish around the corner, feeling that familiar sense of distaste. He knew Baelish was dangerous, cunning, and impossibly slippery, but at present, the man was necessary. The crown's coffers were nearly empty under Robert. Feeding a city through a siege would require coin from somewhere, loans, bribes, forced levies. Littlefinger was adept at that sordid business in a way Ned despised. Still, there was no time to replace him, not with war looming at the gates. That afternoon, Ned retreated to the Godswood. The old weirwood there was smaller than the one at Winterfell, but its face carved in ancient lines still exuded a quiet watchfulness. He knelt on the damp grass. Green leaves rustled overhead. Trapped in the southern heat, he missed the chill breezes of the north, missed the hush of snow and the smell of pine and frost. Here, everything felt thick, humid, claustrophobic. He lowered his head, murmuring a prayer, that his children would be safe, that the realm might know peace, that the old gods would guide his choices. Sansa and Arya still lived in King's Landing. Sansa spent much of her time in the Red Keep's library now, seldom venturing out. Her illusions of a glorious southern court had been shattered. Arya trained with Syrio Farrell or scuttled around the castle, refusing to be caged or frightened into docility. Ned tried to keep them both close, but the demands of the realm consumed most of his days. When he rose, he felt a shadow behind him. It was Varys, the master of whisperers, clad in whispery robes, hands tucked into voluminous sleeves. He bowed his head. My Lord Hand, I fear to disturb your solace, but I thought you'd want to know that Tywin's outriders have reached the outskirts of the Rose Road, just a day's march from the city's farmland. Ned felt his stomach lurch. Already? I expected he would tarry longer at Harrenhal. Varys sighed. He moves faster than we guessed. Perhaps your son's victories in the Riverlands spurred him onward. He must fear that if he waits too long, the North will close in on him from the rear. So he hopes to strike at King's Landing before reinforcements can arrive. Ned turned to face the eunuch. And what of Renley? Does your network say if he marches yet? A small portion of his force edges closer, scouring the King's Road. But rumor says Renley still weighs whether to besiege Storm's End, Stannis' seat, and force a submission from the garrison. If so, it might delay him from attacking the city directly. Varys's plump face twitched with concern. Yet, if Tywin invests the city first, Renly might simply wait, let Tywin do the dangerous work, then sweep in to crush the victor. We are in a precarious position, my lord. Ned's gaze flicked down to the grass. Thank you, Lord Varys. I'll speak to the king at once. Has there been any word from Stannis' scouts along the roads? Varys gave a delicate shrug. They confirm the same. Tywin closes in, no illusions there. Ned nodded grimly. Then war is near. We must ready the gates and walls. You've my leave to go, Lord Varys. As Varys drifted away, Ned sent a silent entreaty to the old gods. All paths led to violence. Yet if he did nothing, Tywin would break the city's walls and slaughter all inside. Ned had to prepare for battle. He spent the rest of the day conferring with the Master-at-Arms and the captains of the Gold Cloaks. They allocated men to the Mud Gate, the King's Gate, the Dragon Gate. Archers were placed along the battlements. Boiling oil and pitch were readied in barrels at strategic points. Runners were assigned to carry messages throughout the city in case the City Watch had to shift from one wall to another. The city's population hunkered in fear, though some tried to flee, an exodus that Stannis' men mostly halted at the gates, for fear of letting saboteurs slip in or out. By dusk, Ned found himself exhausted but unable to rest. Soldiers thronged the yards, lighting torches. Courtiers flitted through the halls with rumors that Tywin's vanguard had already destroyed outlying farms, that a new Sellsword company had arrived to join Stannis, that Renly was negotiating with the Iron Islands or some other outlandish rumor. The air felt as though it crackled with tension. Ned went to the dungeons where Cersei and her children were kept, less a typical dungeon cell, more a guarded suite of rooms. For Gold Cloaks stood watch at the door. Inside, he found the queen pacing like a lioness. Myrcella and Tommen sat huddled in a corner, while Joffrey slouched, scowling. Cersei turned at once. I see you've come to gawk at us again, Stark. Will you release us now that you realize what a savage dog my father can be? Ned's voice was tight. I came to ensure you weren't suffering unduly. No one wants your children harmed. If Tywin attacks the city, it won't go well for anyone. Your family included. She glared. If you think my father will show restraint because of me, you're a fool. Tywin Lannister does what he must to protect the family name. The city might burn. Don't think you'll come out unscathed. Ned studied her. I have no desire to see your children hurt. But what would you have me do? Let you walk free to rejoin your father's host? She gave a short, bitter laugh. You cling to your precious honor. Meanwhile, your city starves. Your throne is stolen by the most humorless Baratheon in history, and your family lines up to be slaughtered. I wonder how many thousands will die for your justice. Joffrey snarled from his seat. You'll regret this, Stark. Every man who locks us up will die screaming. Ned took a breath, forcing calm. Threats don't help your cause, Joffrey, nor does your mother's scorn. I came to see if you need anything, medical supplies, food, wine. Cersei's laugh was harsh. Poison would be kind, perhaps. But never fear, we have what we need for now. She glanced at Tommen and Myrcella with a flicker of maternal worry. Then her face hardened again. Tell your precious King Stannis that when my father arrives, not one stone of this city will be left unturned if he dares to harm us. Ned left, unsettled as ever. He couldn't decide if Cersei's warnings were mere bluster or a glimpse into the real Tywin Lannister's next moves. Either way, the city trembled on the brink of confrontation. Night fell upon King's Landing. Torches lit the walls, archers scanning the darkness for any sign of approach. Ned dozed in the Tower of the Hand, fully dressed, with a sword by his side, expecting to be roused at any moment. The nightmares he conjured were half-waking. He saw the city in flames, Lannister soldiers butchering innocents, Renly's knights charging in at the moment of despair, the howling of a storm over the battlements. Just before dawn, a runner pounded on his door. Ned shot upright, heart thrashing. "What news?" he demanded. "Lord Hand, Tywin's host has been sighted on the King's Road. They are massing near the western gate." Ned sprang into action, gathering men and strapping on armor. He had them rouse Stannis. By the time the sun's first glimmers broke, Ned stood atop the walls of the Gate of the Gods, scanning the fields beyond. The day was clear, the sky a pale wash of lavender, but the land bristled with steel. Thousands of men, all flying the golden lion of Lannister, formed ranks across the open ground. War horses stomped in the churned earth. Standards snapped in a cool breeze. It was not the entire force. Perhaps Tywin had left some men behind or arrayed them in multiple contingents. Even so, it was a formidable sight. Stannis arrived soon after with his retinue. Davos, Florent, Ser Barristan, the Red Priestess. Archers atop the walls shifted aside to let them pass. Stannis gazed out with flinty resolve. "It begins," he muttered. From the Lannister lines, a single rider broke free, galloping toward the gate with a white banner. One of Tywin's heralds, no doubt. Ned glanced at Stannis. "Shall we parley?" Stannis tightened his jaw. "Yes, if only to demand their surrender." Ned signaled for the gates to open just enough to allow a small party out. He and Stannis rode forth with a half-dozen knights, meeting the herald in a patch of neutral ground. The herald was a middle-aged knight in Lannister red, his face strained. He handed over a parchment, bearing Tywin's seal. Stannis opened it and read. Then he spoke, voice sharp. "Your master demands the release of his daughter, his grandson, and the rest of his kin. He calls me an impostor and a usurper. He offers no terms beyond my unconditional surrender." The herald swallowed. "My lord instructs me to say that if you refuse, he will assault the city by nightfall. He has siege engines, sappers, and an army of thousands. He will show no mercy." Ned's knuckles tightened on the reins. He watched Stannis for a reaction. The king's gaze could have carved stone. "My answer is this. The city is mine by right. I am the lawful king, and Tywin Lannister is in open rebellion. Unless he lays down arms and bends the knee, I will see his head mounted on a spike before the walls he so hungers to tear down." The herald's lips parted in a slight tremor. "Shall I convey that directly, your grace?" Stannis nodded once. "Convey it swiftly." They rode back into the city, sealed the gate, and Ned could hear Stannis's hiss of frustration. He is no fool. He knows if he sits idle, Robb Stark might strike at his flank. So he hopes to take the city quickly, free his daughter, and fortify before the rest of the realm can unify against him. Ned turned his horse. If the city is sacked before reinforcements arrive, that is good for no one. Perhaps Tywin hopes to bluff. He may not want to risk losing Cersei and the children if we grow desperate. "He expects our fear," Stannis said, "but will not yield." Ned said nothing. He thought of the small folk huddled in their homes, the shops shuttered, the terror that Tywin Lannister's name provoked. He also recalled the memory of Tywin unleashing Gregor Clegane and other brigands after the Trident years ago to sow chaos when Robert rebelled. That man was capable of atrocities. Once within the walls, Stannis organized a war council by midday. The courtyard was in motion, soldiers forming ranks, archers climbing steps, knights adjusting saddles. If Tywin intended to assault by nightfall, Stannis wanted to be ready. In the council chambers, they discussed 100 ways the Lannisters might try to breach the walls. Battering rams, siege towers, cunning tunnels, or simply a massive frontal charge. Stannis had the city watch, plus his own loyal men who had come by sea, maybe 10,000 in all. Enough, hopefully, to hold the walls against an equal or slightly larger force, but the margin of victory would be thin. "The wildfire stores," said Ser Axel Florent, glancing at Melisandre. "Should we deploy them?" Ned's heart kicked. He remembered Aerys Targaryen's madness with wildfire. The substance was too unpredictable, too destructive. That might be more dangerous to us than to the enemy. Stannis gave Ned a measuring look. We do not have a large supply. Enough for a few traps along the walls, perhaps. I won't set the entire city ablaze. But if it helps us deter an assault at a critical point, we might have no choice. Before Ned could protest further, Stannis moved on to discussing catapults. They would lob stones at any Lannister siege towers. Archers would fire from the battlements. The gates would be heavily reinforced. We must hold them off long enough for the boy in the north to threaten Tywin's rear. Or, failing that, if Renly tries to take advantage, we'll have to pivot again. But first, Tywin, Stannis concluded. By late afternoon, the tension in King's Landing felt like a coiled spring. Thousands of defenders lined the walls, peering out at the Lannister lines. Smoke from campfires blurred the horizon. War horns sounded as Tywin's men shifted formations, but no immediate assault came. The hours crawled by, the sun sliding down the sky. With every passing moment, the city's defenders grew more apprehensive. Ned took a moment to check on Sansa and Arya. They were in the Tower of the Hand, guarded by northern men. Sansa looked pale, but managed a feeble smile when she saw her father. "Will the city burn?" she asked, voice tremulous. "Not if I can help it," Ned said gently. "You must stay here. Don't leave these chambers without my order. Keep your sister near." Arya stood by the window, gazing out. "I can fight," she insisted, cheeks flushed. "Syrio says I'm quicker than half these gold cloaks." Ned bent to her level, gripping her shoulders. "You will stay safe. That is how you can help me." He glanced between them both. "No matter what happens, remember that I love you. I do this to protect you and all those within these walls." He left them with a heavy heart. Twilight fell. Torches flared atop the walls. The watch changed, men gulping watery ale to brace themselves. Then, not long after the sun dipped below the horizon, a horn blast echoed. Another. A wave of motion rippled through the Lannister lines. By torchlight, Ned could see siege towers rolling forward, squat shapes in the gloom. War drums pounded, trumpets called. Stannis' voice rang out along the battlement. "Archers, knock arrows. On my command." The defenders tensed, hearts hammering in unison. Ned felt the old nerves of battle prickle through him. He had been in wars, but seldom behind walls. He steadied himself near Stannis, blade at his side, as hundreds of Lannister infantry swarmed forward, pushing rams and dragging ladders. The night erupted into chaos. Flaming arrows arced overhead, painting the sky with streaks of orange. Ladders clattered against stone, and defenders rushed to shove them away. Boulders from the catapults rained upon the oncoming ranks, smashing men and wood. The Lannisters fired back with their own catapults, hurling stones that crashed into rooftops and walls. Shouts filled the air, a cacophony of steel and terror. At the main gate, Ned stood with a contingent of seasoned knights, shielding a group of archers. The first Lannister wave, carrying a battering ram, came under withering arrow fire. Men screamed as they fell, torches dropping, setting the ground ablaze in patches of burning pitch. But others surged behind them, bodies layered in front. When the ram finally reached the gate, Ned could feel the dull thud of each impact reverberating through the stone beneath his feet. "Oil!" Ned shouted. Sacks of oil and pitch were hauled up, and defenders poured them through murder holes above the gate, setting them alight. Fire engulfed the men below, shrieks cutting through the night. The ram clattered away in charred hands. The gate held for now. Further along the wall, a siege tower ground forward on iron-rimmed wheels. Archers from the top of the tower loosed volleys at the defenders. Stannis had anticipated this. A pair of scorpions, large crossbow-like war machines, were positioned on the ramparts. Their bolts, thick as spears, slammed into the tower, one puncturing a side wall, the other smashing a wheel. The tower lurched, half collapsing, and defenders poured flaming pitch down onto the Lannister men who tumbled out. Amid this chaos, Tywin's men did not relent. Horn blasts sounded again, and fresh ranks charged with renewed fury. "They're testing us," Davos muttered, appearing at Ned's side. Smoke blurred the knight's features. "The real push might come later." Ned nodded, though part of him marveled at how savage the fight already was. The open ground outside was littered with corpses, flaming debris, splintered wood. Cries of wounded horses mingled with the clang of steel. Still, the city's defenders held. The walls of King's Landing, old and thick, had not been breached yet. Through the swirling haze, Ned glimpsed a cluster of men carrying what looked like heavy barrels, pushing forward under a shield wall. "What in the seven?" he began. Then he saw a flicker of green. Wildfire. Tywin's men must have stolen or purchased some from the alchemists. If they managed to ignite that against the walls, the results could be catastrophic. "Stop them!" he roared, pointing. At once, archers focused their shots on that group. Dozens of arrows rained down, puncturing shields, bodies. The barrels dropped, some rolling away. One barrel cracked, and a gout of eerie green flame erupted, consuming nearby men in a rush of agony. The rest scattered. Whatever plan they had for the wildfire seemed to vanish in a wave of disorganized retreat. Hour by hour, the battle raged. Once, the Lannisters nearly got a ladder onto the ramparts. Ned and a handful of knights rushed over, hacking at the men who tried to climb. He almost fell when a Lannister soldier grabbed his leg, but Ser Barristan arrived, white cloak swirling, sword flashing, and the enemy fell away in bloody ruin. All along the walls, defenders and attackers struggled in the glow of torches and flame, the night lit by bursts of orange and flickers of bright green whenever a hidden cache of wildfire erupted. Near midnight, the Lannister horns sounded a retreat. Their men dragged back wounded, leaving the dead behind. On the walls, King's Landing's defenders slumped in exhaustion. Some cheered, but the cheers were hollow. The cost in blood was high. Hundreds of bodies littered the field. The city walls were scorched and battered, but still intact. Ned sank against a merlin, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. Stannis strode by, face smeared with soot, expression grim. "They'll try again," he said. "Tywin won't give up after one assault. See to the wounded, Lord Stark. We must be ready by dawn, if not sooner." And indeed, more fighting erupted in the darkest hours. Small skirmishes as the Lannisters tested vulnerabilities. But by morning, the city yet stood. The second day dawned with the stench of death around the walls. Ned helped coordinate the removal of bodies that lay heaped near the gates. Soldiers kept watch, bleary-eyed from the night's carnage. Tywin's camp, further afield, was reorganizing. Banners stirred in the morning wind, formations shifting. At mid-morning, Ned caught a glimpse of something surprising. Lannister outriders galloping north, away from the city. Curious, he went to the battlements, scanning with a spyglass. Indeed, small cavalry detachments were leaving the main force. He signaled for watchers to see if an attack was imminent, but none came immediately. Tywin's host seemed to be consolidating, not pressing forward. Stannis approached, flanked by Davos and Melisandre. "What do you see?" Ned lowered the glass. "He's sending out riders, perhaps to reconnoiter or perhaps to fend off my son's approach." A voice called from behind them, "Ravens, my lord. We have ravens." A courier dashed up with fresh letters. One bore the wax seal of House Stark. Ned's pulse quickened. He tore it open, scanning the contents. His breath caught. He looked at Stannis, voice husky with relief. "My son marches south. He has left a portion of his army to guard the riverlands and watch for further Lannister movements, but a sizable force is heading this way. He suggests that if we coordinate from two directions, we can trap Tywin and force a surrender." Stannis rubbed his chin, jaw tight. "How long until Robb Stark arrives?" "Likely a fortnight, maybe less if they move quickly." Davos let out a cautious breath. "We might only need to hold until then. 2 weeks. The city can endure that long if we manage supplies." Stannis nodded curtly. "We'll hold. By the time your son arrives, Tywin might be pinned between the city's garrison and the northern host. Melisandre's red gown flickered in the morning light. Lollaress flame may guide our victory, your grace. Do not doubt. Ned half expected Stannis to retort, but the king simply turned and gave orders to reinforce the gates, rotate the watch. He told Ned to see that the wounded were tended and that the walls remained vigilant. If Tywin tries another assault, we cannot be caught off guard, he said. Now that the cities had some respite, the men might grow lax, and so the defenders braced themselves once more. Yet the day passed in relative quiet. No major assault came. Tywin's men continued to gather their dead and fortify positions outside the city. Occasionally, there were small clashes at the outskirts. Patrols skirmishing, archers exchanging volleys, but no grand push. By nightfall, King's Landing huddled behind its walls, uncertain if a second storm would break at any moment. Ned tried to rest, but slept fitfully. Near dawn, a new cry went up along the battlements. Riders approached under a white banner. Another parley. This time, Ned accompanied Stannis once more. They rode out, the muddy ground reeking of decay. Crows cawed in the distance, feasting on corpses from the previous battle. Tywin Lannister himself waited there, clad in gleaming plate with gold inlay. He was flanked by knights in red and gold surcoats. Across from him, Stannis wore black and gold, the fiery heart overshadowing the stag's head. Ned kept a watchful eye, tension coiling in his gut. Tywin's expression was coldly polite. Stannis, I see your walls held, not for lack of trying on our part. Stannis's mouth was a thin line. You wasted your men's lives for nothing. Tywin flicked a glance at Ned, as if noticing him for the first time. I suppose you have Stark to thank for your illusions of legitimacy. A pity that Eddard Stark chose to align with a pretender. I serve the lawful heir, Ned said. You are the one in rebellion. Tywin arched an eyebrow. Then let us talk of heirs. My daughter's children remain your prisoners. That includes the rightful King Joffrey, if I recall the lines of succession. You'll release them at once. Stannis's voice cut the air. Those children are the product of incest. They have no claim, nor does Cersei. You conspired to place bastards upon the Iron Throne, robbing Robert of his legacy. You deserve nothing but the headman's sword. A flicker of something passed across Tywin's face. Anger or annoyance. Bold words, but your city is surrounded, your allies uncertain. If you kill my daughter or grandchildren, I'll burn every field from Dorne to the neck and sow them with salt. The same if you continue to hold them in your dungeons. Release them, and perhaps we can discuss other matters. Stannis barked a humorless laugh. You threaten your own family's lives. You truly are a creature of pure pragmatism. I will not release them, nor will I kneel. Tywin's gaze turned to Ned once more, and his voice dropped. I once admired the name Stark. Your father was a good man, if a bit naive. Don't let the North suffer for Stannis's folly. Hand over my daughter, or at least the children, spare them from this. If you do so, I may show you leniency when I take the city. Ned's throat tightened with revulsion. Tywin's words dripped false civility, but beneath them lay unyielding threat. I do not betray my vows, Lord Tywin, he said. Tywin's lips set in a thin line. So be it. He yanked the reins, turning his horse. Then expect no quarter from me. When next we meet, I'll have your head, or you'll have mine. They parted. The war resumed its patient, terrible countdown. In the following days, Tywin attempted a loose encirclement of King's Landing, cutting off roads to the south and west. Yet some supply barges still came from the east, along the Blackwater Bay under Stannis's fleet. Inside the city, fear grew as food prices soared, but panic did not become riot. Yet, Stannis's men patrolled the streets, stern but orderly. The Gold Cloaks were vigilant, having seen what had happened to those who challenged the new regime. Meanwhile, Renly's camp in the south still did not commit to an attack on the city. Instead, rumors arose that Renly was besieging Storm's End. Stannis's seat was still held by men loyal to him, but they might not withstand the Tyrell might for long. If Storm's End fell, Renly would secure a major strategic fortress. Then he might march on King's Landing, or wait for Tywin and Stannis to batter each other to pieces. "How can we fight on two fronts?" Davos asked Ned one evening as they stood on a tower overlooking the black water of the river. "If Tywin is already at our gates, and Renly marches next, we hope Robb arrives before then," Ned said. "If we crush Tywin or force him to retreat, we might fortify again and face Renly afterward. But there are too many ifs." Davos studied the reflection of torchlight on the rippling current. "King Stannis has the will to do it, that much is certain. Yet I fear we risk ruin even if we win every battle." Ned could only nod in grim accord. Within a week, a second major Lannister assault came. This time, they tried a night attack from multiple sides. Siege towers rolled in from the west, sappers attempted to undermine a section of wall near the south, and scaling ladders appeared at the riverside. The city's defenders fought desperately, hurling back wave after wave with arrows, boiling pitch, and swordwork atop the ramparts. Once again, fires raged along the base of the walls. Screams shredded the darkness. Green-tinged explosions marked the presence of wildfire caches, though fewer than on the first night. By dawn, the walls still stood, but losses on both sides were severe. Ned's arms felt like lead after hours of fighting. He had a gash on his thigh from a Lannister spear, and he knew many of his men had not survived the night. Yet Tywin's host had fared worse in some respects. The ramp they built near the south wall collapsed under heavy catapult fire, burying dozens of men alive. By midday, the Lannister horns sounded another retreat, and a grim, uneasy calm resumed. That afternoon, Ned made the rounds in the city's makeshift infirmaries. Grand halls turned into wards for the wounded. He saw men with burned faces, severed limbs, gaping wounds poorly stitched. The stench of blood, vomit, and rotting flesh filled the air. Maesters and septons did what they could, but supply of medicines ran low, and men died moaning in corners. It was a horror Ned had seen in wars past, but never enjoyed. Amid the groans and the reek, he found Ser Barristan Selmy speaking with a severely wounded knight. Barristan's face was solemn, respectful as he tried to console the man. When Barristan turned and saw Ned, he bowed slightly. "Lord Hand," he said, voice weary, "we held them again, but we're losing too many good men." Ned nodded, swallowing the bitterness in his throat. "I know. And it's not just men, their fathers, brothers, husbands. I fear each day this continues. The realm bleeds." Barristan gave a small, sad smile. "War has always been thus, my lord. I've served many kings, and in the end, they all stain the ground with blood to keep their crowns." Later, Ned found Stannis in the Great Hall, conferring with a group of knights. Melisandre hovered near him, silent and watchful. Stannis looked up, eyes burning with intensity. "Lord Stark, come. We have news. Your son is closer than we thought. Robb Stark's vanguard has been sighted near Rosby, just half a day's ride from Tywin's flank." Relief warred with caution in Ned's chest. "So soon? Then we might have a chance to trap Tywin." Stannis nodded. "Or force him to break off his siege and face your son. If Tywin tries to fight us both, he'll fail. And once Tywin is beaten, the realm will be forced to accept me as king. The Lannister threat ends, and we turn to deal with Renly." "Let's not celebrate prematurely," Ned said. "Tywin is cunning. He might find a way to slip past or outmaneuver Robb. Or he might launch one final, desperate assault on the city before Robb arrives." Stannis' expression was carved from stone. "Then we'll repel him, again." Dusk came, and with it fresh uncertainty. Scouts reported that Tywin's host had begun to shift, some units breaking camp. Was he preparing to retreat or to strike? Ned climbed the walls, scanning for any sign of major movement. Yet the Lannisters stayed where they were. Torches glowed in the distance like a constellation of red stars. In the middle of the night, horns blasted across the plains. Ned jolted awake from a fitful doze at the battlements, hand going to his sword. A ripple of confusion spread among the defenders. It was not the usual Lannister call. This sounded different, more alarmed. Dawn revealed the cause. Dust rose on the horizon behind Tywin's lines, accompanied by standards bearing a direwolf's head. Robb Stark had arrived, and in greater numbers than Ned had dared hope. Word spread rapidly. A northern host, perhaps 15,000 strong, along with some river lords, had come to trap Tywin between the city and their cavalry. Tywin's men scrambled to form ranks facing that new threat. From the walls, Ned witnessed a swirl of chaotic movement. War horns sounded from the north. The Lannisters turned to meet the Starks. Ned's heart pounded. His son was out there, leading men in battle. Suddenly, shouts rose along the city walls. Stannis had ordered the gates to open. He was leading a sortie of cavalry to strike the Lannisters from the rear while they faced Robb's approach. Ned dashed down from the ramparts, ignoring the ache in his leg wound, determined to join that sortie if possible. He found Stannis in the courtyard, mounted on a tall black charger, an expression of steely resolve. Hundreds of knights were massing behind him, their armor flashing in the morning sun, battered from previous battles but still proud. "Lord Hand, you'll stay and command the defense within the walls," Stannis told Ned curtly. "I'll lead this charge personally. We finish Tywin now." Ned hesitated. He wanted to ride out and see his son, but he also knew the city needed leadership if things went awry. "As you command, Your Grace. See that you return victorious." Stannis's mouth twitched in a faint smile. "I intend to." With that, the gates opened, and the thunder of hooves shook the ground as Stannis and his knights surged forth. From the battlements, Ned could see the dramatic scene. Lannister lines pivoting, uncertain whether to face the new threat from the city or the approaching northern host. In the distance, he could just make out the gray direwolf banner. Robb, somewhere in that mass, leading men older and more seasoned than he. Could this be the day they ended Tywin's power once and for all? The battle erupted in the fields outside the city. At first, it seemed the Lannisters might hold their lines, disciplined archers raining arrows on Stannis' cavalry. But then the northern infantry slammed into their flank, hacking and stabbing. War cries echoed across the plain. Smoke rose as someone set fire to a cluster of siege equipment. Ned watched anxiously, trying to gauge the flow. At one point, a portion of the Lannister line broke and began to flee north, only to run into more northern outriders. The chaos was immense, men swirling in lethal circles, horses screaming, banners tangling. By midday, it was clear that Tywin's host was unraveling. Several pockets still fought ferociously, but others attempted to retreat. Stannis' cavalry, battered though it was, hammered them from one side, while the northern infantry pinned them from the other. Ned glimpsed Lannister banners falling, knights cut down, entire formations collapsing. Then he saw a swirl of movement around a golden banner. Tywin's personal guard, perhaps. A wedge of riders attempted a desperate breakout to the south. A roar of defiance rose from the northern lines, and the wedge turned west, away from the city. They galloped off, trailed by some of Stannis' outriders. Ned felt a surge of relief. If Tywin was forced to flee, the day was all but won. The fighting did not end swiftly. Pockets of men kept battling, refusing to yield, but by afternoon, the field was effectively lost to the Lannisters. The Golden Lions lay trampled in the mud, and thousands of red-clad soldiers either bled in the dirt or surrendered to the combined forces of the North and Stannis. From his vantage on the walls, Ned saw the tide of men moving in clusters, herding prisoners, dousing fires, finishing off wounded. At last, the gates of King's Landing swung wide to admit the victors. Ned descended to the courtyard, where he saw King Stannis ride in at the head of a ragged but triumphant column. His armor was dented, spattered with blood, the flaming heart emblem half obscured by grime, but he carried himself proudly. Behind him rode Davos Seaworth, likewise weary but alive, and many other knights. Then came a second wave of men wearing the Stark banner, and among them, Robb Stark. Ned's breath caught. Robb was dusty, his face smeared with sweat and blood, but he rode tall on a gray stallion. When he saw his father, he reined in and dismounted quickly, striding forward. Ned rushed to meet him. They embraced, father and son, as the courtyard erupted in ragged cheers. "Robb," Ned said, voice thick with emotion. "You've done more than I could have hoped." Robb gave a tired grin. "Father, it's good to see you well. I was afraid." He trailed off, eyes flicking to the scorched ramparts. "We came as soon as we could." Stannis dismounted, handing his reins to a squire. He addressed Ned in a clipped tone. "Lord Stark, we've won a great victory. Tywin's host is broken, though the man himself escaped. Likely he'll rally what remains in the west. But the city is safe for now." A knot of northern bannermen, some of them bruised and bloodied, gathered around. The men of the Stormlands cheered their king, while the city watch parted to let them pass. A swirl of competing loyalties played out in that courtyard, but for the moment, the sense of relief was palpable. Ned turned to address Robb. "Was there much loss?" Robb's smile faded. "We lost many good men, the Umbers, the Karstarks, men of the Riverlands. But we shattered Tywin's lines, took many captives. Lord Tywin fled with a handful of riders. My scouts are giving chase, but he may be too quick." Stannis gave a curt nod. "We'll see if we can track him later. First, we secure the city and see that the Lannister prisoners are dealt with." A short time later, they found themselves in the throne room, an odd hush filling the space. The battered, weary victors stood among a swirl of courtiers, gold cloaks, and the city's notables. Many stared at Robb Stark curiously, the young wolf from the north. Others looked at Stannis with renewed respect, seeing he had held King's Landing and repulsed Tywin. Stannis ascended the Iron Throne, ignoring the fresh blood on his gauntlet. He sat, surveying the hall. "This day, the city is safe from the Lannisters," he said, voice echoing. "But Tywin remains at large. Renley besieges Storm's End, and traitors lurk among us. We must remain vigilant." He looked at Ned. "Lord Stark, you will continue as my hand. Your son and his bannermen shall be honored guests, though I expect them to reaffirm their loyalty to the crown. The war is not over." Robb stepped forward, kneeling. "My king," he said carefully, "the North has bled much. We wish to see you bring justice to those who harmed our families. Do that, and you have our swords." Stannis's expression was iron. "Justice will be done. Cersei and her children will stand trial for their crimes, as will the rest of House Lannister if they continue to defy me." A stir ran through the courtiers. The hearing for Cersei promised to be sensational. Some likely hoped for mercy for the children, others demanded blood. Ned felt a pang of dread for the future. A trial in which children might be condemned was no victory. But how else did one handle a line of succession twisted by incest and murder? Stannis rose from the throne. "We must not waste time. The realm must be set right. I will not allow the Targaryens to return and find us in chaos, nor the Greyjoys to strike while we're distracted. Order must be restored." He glanced at Ned. "Bring me Cersei." The queen was brought forth, escorted by gold cloaks and flanked by her children. They had been roused from their guarded chambers. Joffrey looked stunned by the sight of so many armed men. Myrcella bit her lip, tears in her eyes. Tommen clutched at his mother's skirts. Cersei, pale and gaunt, surveyed the battered men and the bloodied banners with grim contempt. "So you've won," she said in a low voice, glancing at Stannis on the throne. "My father is driven away, your barbaric northerners roam the field, and you call yourself king. Do you even understand what you've done?" Stannis's expression did not soften. "You will face justice." Robb stood a short distance away, frowning at the sight of the children, uncertain. Ned's stomach twisted as he saw Joffrey's sullen hatred. The boy had once been betrothed to Sansa, but that felt like a lifetime ago. Stannis declared the immediate charges: treason, incest, conspiracy to murder the rightful king, forging false heirs. Each word echoed in the hall. Cersei gave no denial. She only stared with proud fury, as if the entire realm had become her enemy. When Stannis finished, he said, "Have you anything to say before sentence is pronounced?" Joffrey took a trembling step forward. You can't do this. I am the king. Mother, tell them." Cersei's face twisted. "You are no king, Joffrey. Not in their eyes. It doesn't matter what we say. They've already decided our fate." Stannis gestured to a pair of Kingsguard who had replaced the old Lannister loyalists. "Take them to the black cells until a formal trial can be arranged before the full court. After that, the king's justice will be served." Gold cloaks moved in. Myrcella broke into sobs. Tommen looked numb, and Joffrey spat curses, threatening them all. But the men dragged them away, leaving Cersei last. She turned her gaze on Ned. "I hope you're happy, Stark," she said softly. "I hope you sleep well with all the blood you've spilled." Ned closed his eyes for a moment. "This was never what I wanted," he murmured. Her bitter laugh echoed as she was led out. With the Lannisters subdued, at least within the city, Stannis turned to the other crisis, Renly's host. For a time, King's Landing found a measure of relief, thanks to Robb's arrival and the scattering of Tywin's forces. Shops reopened, people ventured forth, but the war still loomed. Tywin might regroup and Renly threatened from the Reach. The small council reconvened in earnest, with Stannis at its head, Ned at his right, and Robb as an honored guest, though not officially on the council. There, Ned learned that Renly had Storm's End surrounded. Couriers from the fortress pleaded for relief, but Stannis's loyal castellan refused to yield. If the castle fell, Renly would control a strategic base on the eastern coastline. Would he then march on King's Landing, or was he content to gather more alliances? Robb spoke up in council, looking from Stannis to Ned. "I've marched long and lost many men to get here. I've no taste for further southern campaigns unless truly necessary. My lords demand we return north once the realm is secure. My sisters remain here, of course, and I wish them safe, but—" He trailed off, uncertain how to phrase his reluctance. Stannis regarded him coolly. "The North is not exempt from the decisions of the Iron Throne, nor can I let the realm fracture. If you mean to hold the Riverlands, that is more complicated. Those lords owe fealty to me." Robb bristled slightly. "They also see me as their ally against the Lannisters. They might bend the knee to you if they trust your reign. But you must earn their loyalty, not demand it." Stannis's face was unreadable. Melisandre observed silently, her presence like a dark shape in the corner of Ned's vision. Davos tried to mediate. "Perhaps a meeting with the Riverlords, your grace. Offer them some measure of autonomy under your rule, so long as they remain loyal." Stannis made a sound of grudging assent. "Very well, but first we must address Renly. If my brother continues his rebellion, we cannot have a stable realm. I must retake Storm's End, or at least break his siege." Ned listened, feeling the unrelenting press of politics. One battle had been won, but the war had many heads, each rearing in turn. In the days that followed, Robb's men recuperated in the city, mixing warily with Stannis's forces. Supplies remained tight, so many mouths to feed in a city already threatened by shortages. But Littlefinger orchestrated enough shipments by sea to stave off immediate hunger. The cost in debt soared, but the city did not starve. Meanwhile, letters arrived from the Vale. Lisa Arryn still refused to commit. The Vale was closed to all, waiting to see which side triumphed. The Westerlands remained under partial Lannister control, though many smaller lords might switch allegiance if Tywin's power truly broke. The Tyrells, in the meantime, raised more banners for Renly. All the while, the imprisoned Lannisters weighed on everyone's mind. Cersei, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were in the dungeons. A formal trial was promised, but many demanded immediate execution to appease the realm. Stannis refused, though whether it was out of principle or calculation, Ned couldn't say. Perhaps he hoped to use them as hostages if Tywin appeared again. Then, unexpectedly, a raven arrived with shocking news. Renly Baratheon had been found dead in his camp. Rumors swirled. Some said an assassin, others whispered of dark magic. Some claimed the Knight of Flowers had discovered his body in the night, a shadow with a burning heart rumored to have killed him. The rumor was so bizarre, Ned hardly knew what to think. But the effect was immediate. The Tyrell alliance fractured. Many Tyrell bannermen withdrew, uncertain whether to keep fighting for a dead man's claim. Storm's End, besieged and on the verge of falling, might soon be relieved by Stannis without a fight. Renley dead, Robb murmured when Ned told him the rumor. He was young, strong, had all the southern lords behind him. How? Ned shook his head. I don't know, but it changes the landscape. Stannis will likely call those bannermen to bend the knee to him. The Tyrells might negotiate, or they might throw their support behind a new candidate, perhaps the infant child of Margaery Tyrell and some alliance. Or the Tyrells might simply retreat for now. Robb frowned. I don't like it. So many strange deaths, so many rumors of shadows. He trailed off, glancing around as if expecting to see Melisandre looming behind them. In the Red Keep, the reaction was swift. Stannis declared himself the sole surviving brother of Robert, the undisputed Baratheon claimant. He demanded that the Tyrells either submit to him or face destruction. Some houses in the Reach capitulated quickly, but others refused. The realm was still far from united. And amid it all, Ned found himself increasingly uneasy about Melisandre. She had grown ever closer to Stannis' side, speaking softly of the Lord of Light, offering cryptic prophecy. Rumors circulated that she had ways to kill from afar, that shadowy creatures obeyed her. Ned did not traffic in such talk, but he couldn't entirely ignore the fearful whispers. One evening, after finishing a council session with Robb and Stannis, Ned lingered to speak privately with the king. The others left, leaving only Melisandre in the corner. Ned cleared his throat. Your Grace, I want to address something. These rumors about shadows, about your brother's death. Stannis's gaze hardened. I know what they say, that I used foul sorcery to kill Renley. Lies. I had no need to stoop to that. My cause is just, and if the gods will it, so be it. Melisandre's voice slid in quietly. Lawless light is a beacon. Often, lesser minds see only darkness where they do not understand. Renley was an obstacle. Now he is gone. Ned felt a chill. An obstacle you overcame how? Stannis's jaw tightened. Enough. I am no kinslayer. I do not regret that Renley is gone. But I did not command any black sorcery. This talk is a distraction from the real war. Ned bit back further questions, bowing. As you say, Your Grace. But the seed of suspicion took root in his mind. Regardless of how it happened, Renly's death meant the Tyrell forces wavered. Within a fortnight, Storm's End was relieved when the besieging army disbanded, half of them bending the knee to Stannis, half fleeing home. Mace Tyrell sent cautious overtures of peace. By the time the first green shoots of spring began to appear, King's Landing was no longer threatened by a united southern army. Instead, the realm had a new status quo. Stannis on the throne, Robb Stark allied with him, Tywin Lannister in flight, Renly dead, and Cersei and her children imprisoned. Yet the realm was not at peace. Skirmishes continued in the Westerlands, where Tywin tried to hold on. The Riverlands smoldered with resentment. In the north, men yearned for home after so many battles. In the east, rumors spoke of Daenerys Targaryen rallying forces with dragons at her side. The Iron Islands stirred, Balon Greyjoy perhaps eyeing an opportunity to reave the northern coasts. And the question of what to do with the Lannister hostages loomed. Stannis eventually decided to hold a grand trial. Lords from across the realm, or their representatives, were invited to witness. Ned suspected it was a show of royal authority as much as a genuine hearing. He dreaded the outcome, but as Hand of the King, he would have to be there, guiding procedure. The day of the trial dawned cool, a mild breeze drifting in from Blackwater Bay. The throne room was packed with lords, knights, and curious courtiers. The Lannisters were brought forth. Cersei, proud but haggard, her children behind her. Joffrey pale with fear, Myrcella trembling, Tommen wide-eyed. Guards flanked them, while Stannis presided from the Iron Throne, Ned by his side. The charges were read aloud by the court herald. Incest, treason, conspiracy to commit regicide, the death of Jon Arryn, the attempt on Bran Stark, the murder of King Robert, though the latter was officially deemed manslaughter by Wine if not proven otherwise. Witnesses were called. Grand Maester Pycelle stammered about Robert's last days. Littlefinger offered sly half-truths, and Ned spoke of the genealogical evidence discovered by Jon Arryn. Varys, too, gave cryptic testimony. Through it all, Cersei never looked away from Stannis, her eyes cold. Joffrey seethed. Myrcella sobbed softly. Tommen stood as though frozen. When asked to speak, Cersei said only, "This is a farce. I regret nothing." In a hush, Stannis pronounced sentence. Cersei would be executed for treason and incest, stripped of all titles. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, being minors, were to be spared immediate execution, but would be kept under guard until the king decided their fate. As bastard-born children of incest, they had no claim to the throne, no inheritance, but the question of exile or permanent confinement was left open. A wave of reaction swept the court. Some demanded that the children also be punished, while others looked uneasy at condemning children for their parents' sins. Ned felt hollow. Even if the law demanded this, it felt like a grim spectacle. The look on Tommen's face, so young, so terrified, haunted him. Stannis then announced that Tywin Lannister was named a traitor. His lands and titles forfeit unless he surrendered within a fortnight. If he refused, all the might of the Iron Throne and the North would descend upon him in Casterly Rock. That night, Ned found no rest. The execution was scheduled for dawn in the courtyard. He had never liked Cersei, never trusted her, but the thought of seeing her beheaded before a jeering crowd made him ill. Perhaps the realm demanded it, but the cost in humanity was high. At sunrise, a modest crowd gathered in the Red Keep's courtyard. The gold cloaks held them at bay, while a platform had been erected with a chopping block. Stannis observed from a small dais, flanked by knights. Ned stood near him, face grim. Robb was absent, possibly refusing to witness this. Others watched from windows or balconies. Sansa and Arya, perhaps glimpsing horrors that would mark them. Cersei was brought forth, hands bound, her eyes scanning the crowd with fierce composure. She saw Ned and paused. "I hope you choke on your pity," she said quietly, then was forced to kneel at the block. Before the executioner could lower the blade, she turned her head slightly and spat a last curse. "When my father comes, he'll burn your precious city to the ground. Remember my words." Her sentence was carried out with a single, swift stroke. The crowd seemed to exhale in a communal hush. Blood ran dark on the wood. Ned closed his eyes, thinking of how differently things might have gone had he chosen another path. But the realm churned on. Within days, Tywin Lannister's answer came. He refused to surrender, vowing vengeance. He rallied what remained of his armies in the Westerlands, forging alliances with lesser houses. Stannis declared that they would march west soon, with northern support. In the meantime, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen remained locked away, spared but effectively exiled from normal life. Ned privately doubted any of them would ever truly be free. Robb prepared his men to ride west, while Ned faced a new reality. He had helped place Stannis on the throne, yet the war threatened to continue. Peace was nowhere in sight. House Tyrell might or might not become an ally. The Vale, Dorne, and the Iron Islands all perched like vultures, waiting. And across the narrow sea, if rumors were true, a Targaryen queen was building strength with living dragons. On a dreary evening, with spring rains lashing the windows of the Tower of the Hand, Ned sat with Sansa and Arya, letting them recite stories from the old days of their lessons, trying to distract them from the nightmares swirling outside. He thought of the cost already paid by so many families. Yet, in a grim corner of his mind, Ned Stark recognized. All these horrors, all these shifting alliances, might have been far worse if Joffrey had ascended the throne unchallenged, or if Cersei had fled to raise an army in secret. Perhaps the realm had been spared a worse fate by Ned's decision not to warn her. But as he met Arya's troubled gaze and saw how much she'd changed, saw the haunted look in Sansa's eyes, he wondered if this truly was the better path. The next days blurred in a tide of preparations. Ravens flitted between King's Landing and Riverrun, between the city and Highgarden. Stannis's men led foraging expeditions, trying to secure supplies for an eventual march west. Robb's outriders scouted the roads leading to Renley, where remnants of Lannister supporters lingered. The unstoppable momentum of war rolled on. At length, the day came when Robb marched out again with his banners. Stannis's forces likewise arrayed for a joint campaign to bring Tywin to heel. Ned elected to remain behind in King's Landing for the time being. Someone had to govern, keep the capital from descending into chaos. Sansa and Arya stayed with him, safer here than on the front lines. They stood on the ramparts, watching Robb's army depart. Arya's face showed a flicker of envy, wanting to ride into adventure. Sansa only seemed relieved to see the war move away. When the last banners faded from view, Ned sighed. "May the gods watch over him," he said quietly. He prayed that the next battle might end quickly, that Tywin would finally yield, that the realm could begin healing. But he knew Tywin Lannister's pride too well. That man would never bend willingly. So the story continued. Ned's single decision to keep silent instead of warning Cersei had reshaped the entire War of the Five Kings. Instead of dying on the steps of Baelor September, Ned Stark stood as Hand of King Stannis. Instead of Joffrey ruling in cruelty, the boy languished in a cell. Instead of a chaotic beginning to the war, the initial clash had been decided by Stannis and Robb uniting against Tywin. Yet the realm still bled, and the future remained wreathed in storm clouds. Ned often found himself pacing the corridors of the Red Keep late at night, listening to the hush of a city half asleep, interrupted by the occasional cry or muffled argument. He would pass by the throne room, empty and silent except for a handful of guards. The Iron Throne loomed in the darkness, a menacing silhouette. For all the hope of rightful rule, that seat of jagged swords had consumed so many lives. He would think of Robert, once a friend, rotting now in the Arrow. Jarl Crypt, never having known that the woman he called a wife betrayed him with her brother. He would think of Lyanna, how she had once been the impetus for Robert's rebellion. Now Lyanna's memory felt distant, overshadowed by new tragedies. He would think of his daughters, robbed of innocence. He would think of the men who died on the walls, the men who died in the fields, the families that starved. All because power was contested by a few, and the wheels of war ground the powerless into dust. And he would wonder if, had he told Cersei that day in the Godswood that he knew her secret, the realm might have found a path to less bloodshed. The question never left him. And yet every time he circled back, he would remember Joffrey's cruelty, the Lannister arrogance, the quiet evidence that Cersei and Jaime had schemed to kill or silence any who discovered their secret. Perhaps no better road had existed. Or perhaps this was simply the road the gods had willed. As weeks turned into months, dispatches arrived from the west. Fierce battles near the Golden Tooth, minor skirmishes around Ashmark, news that Tywin had retreated to Casterly Rock, threatening to outlast any siege behind those impregnable walls. The joint forces of Stannis and Robb might try to starve him out, or find a weakness in the ancient fortress. More blood would be spilled either way. Some nights, Ned lay awake, thinking of the north. Winter might be coming soon. The nights grew longer, the days cooler. The realm had to unify or face destruction when the snows came. Yet they still squabbled, lords jockeying for advantage, families bent on vengeance. He also heard scraps of rumor from across the narrow sea. Daenerys Targaryen had indeed hatched dragons and was forging alliances in Slaver's Bay. She might sail west one day, claiming a right older than the Baratheon line. If that happened, how would a fractured Westeros respond? But that was for the future. For now, Ned Stark did what he had always done. He stood by his duty, upheld his honor, and tried to steer the realm toward justice. The cost would be high, the peace uncertain. The realm might limp along, or it might tear itself apart in a final, bloody convulsion. Ned could not see the end. Sometimes, on the ramparts at night, he would speak quietly to Ser Barristan or to Davos, men of principle who likewise felt uneasy about the realm's direction. Other times, he would stand alone, eyes fixed on the distant stars, remembering the words of House Stark. Winter is coming. And indeed it was, creeping toward them, unstoppable. In the end, Was this fate better or worse than the world he might have left behind if he had warned Cersei? Hard to say. The lines of fate frayed and twisted. Perhaps the war would eventually subside under Stannis' iron rule. Perhaps Tywin would be crushed at Casterly Rock, or forced to yield. Perhaps the small folk would at last know a respite from slaughter. Or perhaps the realm, exhausted by these endless campaigns, would be easy pickings for a Targaryen return or some other outside threat. All Ned knew for sure was that his choice had kept him alive long enough to see war from a vantage he never wanted, inside the heart of power in King's Landing. And for every moment he remained, he tried to do good, to show mercy, to champion the innocent. Perhaps that, in some measure, would redeem the realm's dark path. Late one night, alone in the Godswood, Ned bowed his head before the weirwood tree, its face dappled by moonlight. The tree's carved features seemed to watch him with silent, timeless eyes. "I have done what I thought was right," he whispered. "I have no illusions that it was enough or that it was without cost. But I will continue. For the North, for my children, and for the sake of this realm we call home." A breeze stirred the leaves, a soft susurrus like distant voices. Ned closed his eyes and let that faint sound envelop him. War raged in Westeros. Kings rose and fell. Blood dyed the fields red. But as Ned knelt there in the hush of the Godswood, he thought perhaps he felt the faint echo of approval from the old gods, or maybe it was only the wind. He did not expect an answer. He would never know if the path he had chosen was the best. But he would walk it, step by step, in silence, determined to hold fast to the core of who he was, honor-bound to the bitter end. And so the tale continued, in a realm forever poised on the knife's edge of fate, shaped by a single choice never undone.